Have you ever been curious about learning 2D animation? Or maybe your background is in more traditional animation and you'd like to explore 2D digital animation? This course, Learning Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, a step-by-step course in cutout character animation, has been designed as both a step-by-step training for beginners, where each chapter is followed in order, as well as a refresher course for those who want to skip around the chapters for what they need. This course will not only get you comfortable using Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, but it will also teach you some basic animation principles, as well as how to design and animate your own characters. So whether you're a beginner or a seasoned pro looking to brush up on your animation, learning Toon Boom Harmony Essentials has something for you. My name is Tony Ross, and I'll be your instructor. My specialty is teaching complex software in a simple manner so it's easy to follow. I have over 5 years experience both using and teaching Toon Boom software. I'll teach you everything from the interface to exporting the simple scene. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, my name is Tony Ross, and I'm an O'Reilly video author. I'm the owner and creator of TonyTeach.com and a freelance motion artist, animator, and trainer. I have over 20 years experience in teaching and training computer graphics, video, web design, and animation. I specialize in creating simple solutions for complex problems and creating lessons that are challenging without being overwhelming for the beginner or the novice. I teach by one simple mantra: keep it simple, make it perfect. If you don't have time to make it perfect, rethink the idea. I thank you in advance for your time, and I hope you enjoy this course. The one thing that might take a little bit of getting used to is basically the way a Toon Boom Harmony file looks. Typically, if you were opening a Photoshop document or an Illustrator document, it's a single object, and you would simply double-click on that to open it. Toon Boom Harmony works a little bit different. For example, I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'll go to the folder that I'm saving all of my documents, and I want to open the document Export. So what you see here is a folder, so I can simply select that folder and click Open. Now once it's open, there's a series of folders and other documents. Now to open this, you'll simply look for this icon here, and it will say export.xstage. So if I double click, I now have the document open. Now another thing to think about is once you create a document, just because you've created that document doesn't mean you have the Xstage extension added to your folder. So once you've created the document, make sure you save directly afterward. Following these simple steps should make it pretty easy to get in and out of Harmony and create your own documents, as well as opening any of the exercise files. If you haven't already, you can go to toonboom.com to download a copy of Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. You'd simply go to Products, and you can either click for more details, or if you'd just like to try this out, you can click Try Now, and you'll be able to download a 21-day version of the program. There are no limitations in the program, and you're able to use it even for commercial uses for 21 days. Now, there are 3 different versions of Harmony: Essentials, Advanced, and Premium. This training title is actually made specifically for Essentials, but you can use the exact same tutorials for Essentials and Advanced.
Greetings and welcome to your O'Reilly training course. This movie is going to help you find and easily access your working files for your O'Reilly course. The working files are designed to allow you to work alongside the author as they're teaching the course material, and in most cases, the author will announce whenever they have provided a working file. Please note that the courses seen in this video may not be the same as the course you are currently learning. This video is meant only to demonstrate how to get your working files. If you are a subscriber to our learning library, you will see a Download Working Files button once you get into the details of the course. To download the working files, simply left-click on the Download Working Files button and your browser will automatically download the working files as a zip file. Once the working files have finished downloading, you can simply extract the downloaded zip file and place them directly onto your desktop. It's as easy as that. If you have downloaded this course from our website, then you will have gone to a download page that looks like this, and you may see that the working files are a separate download file. Once you have downloaded the working files, you can extract the downloaded zip files and place them directly onto your desktop. From the player, you will see a menu bar located up here with various buttons just above the video. From the player menu bar, look for this button. When you move your mouse over it, a label will show up that reads Open Working Files. Left-click on this icon and a window will open up to show you where the files are located. You may see multiple files as the working files are organized within them. To make things easier for yourself, we suggest copying all of these working files to the desktop of your computer. Please note that if you downloaded the working files separately, as we mentioned earlier, you will not see them here. However, you should already know where they are, as you should have extracted them and placed them somewhere on your computer, well, like the desktop. If you are watching this from the DVD, There are a couple of ways to access the working files directory so you can open up your files. Now, you will only be able to open these files from the DVD. If you make some changes and would like to save them, you will need to save them onto your computer. Copy the working files to the desktop, as we have shown earlier from the player. This way you can find them quickly and easily because they are located on your desktop, and you can open and save any changes as you work along with the lessons. You can also find the working files by going directly into the Files folder. To get to this folder from your DVD on your PC, go into your computer, find your DVD drive with the disk in it, and select it. You will see that there will be a Working Files folder on the disk that you can drag and drop to your desktop. You can also copy this to your desktop by right-clicking on the folder and selecting Copy, then right-clicking on your desktop and selecting Paste. If you are on a Mac, click on the DVD icon for the disk on your desktop. A window will open and show you all the files on the disk. You can then drag and drop the working files to your desktop. You can also copy this to your desktop by right-clicking on the folder and selecting Copy, then right-clicking on your desktop and selecting Paste.
If you're more familiar with animating in a program like Adobe Flash, there are a few things you might need to know about Toon Boom Harmony before getting started. Now, a little about my background. I started animating in Adobe Flash, and then several years ago I was introduced to Toon Boom products. So I want to share with you a few things that I wish I knew ahead of time, and knowing these is going to help you get used to using Harmony. For one, you can animate without using symbols. In Flash, basically to do any type of movement, you're going to have to create a symbol. In Toon Boom Harmony, symbols are not needed. You can create a symbol, and it's even been said that the only reason that there are symbols in Toon Boom Harmony is because it's getting people who are used to using Flash a little more comfortable. Now, another thing, there is no action script or interactive coding that's in Flash. Toon Boom Harmony is basically just for animation. Now, Flash is a great program, and it does a lot of things. But when you're in Toon Boom Harmony, all you need to think about is working on your animation. It's because of its concentration on animation that all the other features really stand out. For instance, I have this document open, and you can see this rectangle here. Now, in Flash, this would be referred to as the stage. In Toon Boom, this is your camera. So you shouldn't think about just drawing inside this little rectangle area. If I zoom out, you can see that I've got all these different elements because I can move the camera anywhere I'd like to go. And even things like camera masking, so I can turn on a camera mask so I can see what my final piece is going to look like. Or turn on my action safe and title safe lines. These basic things are here mainly because Toon Boom Harmony is an animation program, and its focus is on animation. In addition to this, Toon Boom Harmony has some very powerful rigging tools, as well as auto lip sync and a color system that you can update on the fly. So I'll be showing you more and more of these differences throughout the title, but rest assured, unlike Flash, Toon Boom Harmony is specifically for animation. If you're more familiar with using Toon Boom Studio than using Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, there are a few things you should know. One, in October 2015, Toon Boom will be discontinuing the program Toon Boom Studio. What will be replacing it is Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. Now, there are a few things that did exist in Toon Boom Studio that are not in Harmony Essentials. For one, you do not have access to the exposure sheet or the X sheet. Two, there's no storyline or ability to connect scene to scene. For that, you'll basically be exporting each scene and then connecting them in a separate program. There's also no stop motion abilities. And last but not least, there are no blockbuster effects as there were in the last version of Toon Boom Studio. Now you might be thinking, okay, I'm giving up a lot. Why should I use Toon Boom Harmony Essentials? The main reason is you're going to have better rigging as well as bone tools, and you'll have a lot more control over the lip sync. Not to mention, you'll be learning how to use the same interface that the pros use to create shows like The Simpsons, SpongeBob, or even shows on Disney. In addition to this, I've actually used Toon Boom Studio as well as Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, and I can tell you, you have a lot more control with respect to your characters, and you can edit them and move them around just by using keyboard shortcuts. A lot of these shortcuts did not exist in Toon Boom Studio. So if you're on the fence about this, I would say go ahead and download the 21-day demo of Toon Boom Harmony Essentials and try it out. If you've never heard of Toon Boom Harmony, or even heard of Toon Boom, you've probably still seen their work. Now, Toon Boom products have been used in everything from Simpsons, Family Guy, SpongeBob, as well as several Disney features. Now, once upon a time, Toon Boom had several different software options. For beginners and hobbyists, there was Toon Boom Studio, and then for professionals and smaller studios, there was Toon Boom Animate and Toon Boom Animate Pro. And then for the larger studios, there was Toon Boom Harmony. Now, Toon Boom Harmony has always been the most powerful, and it's also been the most expensive. But recently, what Toon Boom did was they restructured how their software was distributed. So instead of having Toon Boom Studio, Toon Boom Animate Pro, and Harmony, there is now just Harmony. Now, there are three different versions of Harmony. There's Harmony Essentials, Harmony Advanced, and Harmony Premium. In addition to this, they've set up a system so that it's a lot more affordable, and there are options where you can either pay monthly, annually, or buy the software outright. Now, in my opinion, one of the greatest things about the software, the way it's set up now, is even something that's been created with Harmony Premium can actually be opened up in Harmony Essentials. Now, you won't be able to edit a lot of the things that were in Harmony Premium, but you can still see how they were set up, and you can start adding things onto it. In addition to this, you'll be learning how to use the interface that even the pros use, and this is even if you use the bottom-of-the-line software, which is Harmony Essentials. For this training title, we're going to be focusing on Harmony Essentials, but pretty much everything we're doing here can be done in Harmony Essentials or Harmony Advanced. When you first launch Harmony Essentials, you'll be given options for setting your movie's name and where you want to save the file, as well as setting options for the dimensions and frame rate. Now, there are many options for camera size. If I select here, we can have all of our different options. For right now, I'm going to leave this at 1080p. And if you look right below, we also have the frame rate of 24 frames per second. When you name your scenes, one thing you should be aware of is you don't really want to have spaces, but in case we do make a space, I'll just simply call this interface. Now, just hit the space bar, but it's automatically going to drop in an underscore because spaces really don't work that well with Harmony. So it's going to automatically set those there for you. So now I'm going to simply create scene. Now we have the total interface of Harmony Essentials. This is broken up into windows, views, as well as toolbars. So if you see these top little strips here, these are referred to as toolbars. The larger areas, for instance, we have the camera view right here in the center. And I can also click this little tab to get to a different view, the drawing view. And another one of the windows we have is right down at the base, and this is the timeline. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have another toolbar, and this is all of the tools that we're going to be using. And these are set up in selection tools, drawing tools, as well as different tools for animation and onion skin. And on the far right, we have our properties, our library, and our top view. Now, these windows and tabs are all set up under the default view of the workspace. So if we go to Windows, come down to Workspace, and we can see that this is the default workspace. And we'll now work on setting up our preferences. For the most part, we'll be using Harmony Essentials in its default settings and preferences. But there are a few items that we're going to be changing. In order to do this, we'll simply go to Sage Essentials, come down to Preferences, and one of the first things we want to take a look at are the shortcuts. Now, throughout the course, I'm going to be using a lot of shortcut keys, and right now, by default, these are set for Toon Boom Harmony. Now, you can set your keyboard shortcut preferences to Adobe Flash or Toon Boom Studio, but for this title, we're going to be leaving these set at the default of Toon Boom Harmony. Now, in addition to this, I'm going to go to the General tab, Options, and I want to select Focus on Mouse Enter. Now, to show you what Focus on Mouse Enter does, I'm going to simply go ahead and click OK. And if you look at where my mouse is right now, there's a thin red line around the timeline. But if I move my mouse toward the camera view, now that thin red line is around the camera view. If I move over to Tool Properties, now Tool Properties is highlighted. So Focus on Mouse Enter basically sets up the view of wherever you have your mouse or cursor moved to. Now, one last change we're going to do is we're going to change the preference of how our images show up. Toon Boom Harmony is a vector-based program, and what I want to do real quick is simply select my paintbrush, and I'm going to draw just a little scribble. And if we look at the screen, this looks a little bitmapped, and this is mainly because of the default alias settings. So I'll simply go to Preferences, and I'm going to select OpenGL. Now, what I'm looking for is the full scene anti-aliasing, and I want to select this box. Now, normally, you would have to restart the program to see the difference, but I've already had mine turn on, so that preference is going to work automatically for me. So I'll click OK. And now if you look at our image, it looks a lot smoother. So now that we've changed a few of these preferences, the next time we open up our program, everything will be set exactly the way we need it. In Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, you have several workspaces you can use. Right now, we have the default workspace, and if I come up here to the top, I can click and select the hand-drawn workspace, the compositing workspace, and the animating workspace. Now, each of these is a different combination of toolbars and windows and different setups, so it makes it easier for you to work on different projects. Now, for this title, we're going to create a custom workspace, and it's going to be based off of the default setup. So let's go back to our default workspace. Now, if you're working with Toon Boom Harmony Advanced or Toon Boom Harmony Premium, you have the option of creating a new workspace. Toon Boom Harmony Essentials works a little bit different, and I'm going to show you the steps right now. So what I'm going to do is click this little icon right here for the Workspace Manager, and I'll select the default workspace. Come down here to the bottom and click this little plus sign to duplicate it. I'll select Default To, and we're going to rename this. Click the Rename button, and I'm simply going to call this Tony Teach 01. And I'll select this, and I'm going to add this over to the toolbar. And simply click OK. So now if I go up to the top, I actually have the option of going to Tony Teach 01. That is how we can set up our new custom workspace. To change our Tony Teach workspace, we're going to add a toolbar as well as a different camera view. Now the camera views we currently have are the main camera, which is right in the center. In addition to that, we also have the top view right here. What I want to add now is a side view. So we'll go to Windows, come down and select Side. And so we have this window here. So what I want to do is select the tab right here. I'm going to click and drag this. I'm going to drag it over to our color view area until the color tab is selected. And I'll let go of my mouse. Now I have the side view parented with the color tab. Next, I want to add in our advanced animation toolbar. So let's go to Windows, Toolbars, Advanced Animation. We now have our new Tony Teach setup. So to see if it's saved correctly, I'm going to go and select Default to go to our default workspace. And there's no advanced animation tools here, and there's no side view next to color. So we'll now go back to Tony Teach 01, and here are our advanced animation tools, and here is the side camera view right next to color. Now, in addition to these workspace setups, you can also temporarily adjust your views by using these little arrows right here. So I'm going to click on the timeline arrow. This has temporarily hidden my camera view. And to open that back up, just click the down arrow. And you can also move your cursor right between the two different sets of windows and slide them back and forth as needed. So with custom workspaces and being able to add on different windows or toolbars to different tabs, you should be able to set up a workspace that's more comfortable for you and your production pipeline. This last preference is actually pretty important and very hidden. I can tell you from experience from both myself and clients and colleagues that this particular little preference is going to save you a lot of trouble in the long run. Now, normally when you're saving your work, you'll often do a Command S or Control S if you're on PC, or a simple File and Save. Sometimes you may forget to do that. And there are a lot of programs that have a little bit of leeway or forgiveness if you don't do that. But Toon Boom Harmony is not one of those programs that is going to automatically save your work. Basically, each time you create a new document, the only thing you are doing is creating the directory for that document. If you were to create a new document and continue working without ever doing File, Save, Command S, or Control S, there is no automatic backup or save. That being said, let me show you how you can turn that preference on. Go to Stage Essentials. Come down to Preferences, and I want to go to General. Right here we see Save and Autosave. So you can actually set the intervals to every few minutes. You can even make sure that it asks before saving. So a good habit would just be to go ahead and select Enabled and click OK. Now by doing this, you'll automatically have autosaves as you're working. It's always a good practice to still do Command S or Control S, kind of almost keep it as a nervous twitch, and that way you can save yourself from losing hours of work. When using the shape tools in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, it may seem like they're just the average shape tool, but with the addition of a few quick keys as well as the tool properties, you have a lot of power over these basic shapes or primitives. I'm going to first start with the line tool, so I can simply select the line tool. If you look over at the properties, you can adjust the size of the stroke of the line tool, draw this straight out, and you can start adjusting the size using the slider here. You can also expand this window so we can see the rest of our presets. And so you have these different presets you can go with. For instance, if I select number 4 It has a different preset there. And you can also add your own presets. Now, all of this is pretty basic for now. I'm just going to go ahead and select all of these. Command A, Control A on PC, and delete. And what I want to show you now is some of the shortcuts you can use. How do you get a curved line? If I hold down my Command key on the Mac or Control key on the PC, I can start to curve this. So I'm still holding down my mouse, but I'm also holding down my Command key. And again, that would be Control on PC. And once I have the curve that I'd like, I let go of the mouse, let go of the keyboard. Now, in addition to this, I can also control the width of the stroke. I can simply hold down my O key and click and drag, and the stroke can be much larger than what's originally there. I'm basically controlling what I was controlling earlier using properties. Once I let go of the mouse, if you look over here in the properties, this is now at a stroke of 129.3. So if I click and drag, you see the difference in the stroke. And again, I can still hold down my Command key to curve this, and this would be, again, the Control key on PC. Let go of the mouse, let go of the keyboard. Now I'm going to get rid of these again. I'll just do Command A, that's Control A on PC. Press Delete or Backspace. And what I want to go back to is one of our original presets just to show some of the other options that are available for working with the line tool. So I'll simply click Pencil 2. I'm just going to drag out a line here and drag out several. Now by default, each of these lines are separate. So if I go to my Select tool, I can click each one of these lines individually and move them around. So what I want to do now is I want to adjust my tool properties. So each time I draw on a line, it will become part of a flat piece of artwork versus being several individual lines. So let's go to my line tool, and I'll come down to my properties, and this very last option here is Auto Flatten. So now if I decide to draw several lines, and I'm going to do a quick key here and just simply hold down my Command key to get the Select tool, and you can hold down your Control key on PC. And you see each one of these lines is an individual line. I can just move the line in its entirety wherever I need it to be. Anytime these lines intersect, it's going to be a different line versus what we drew out originally. So the line tool is actually quite powerful once you understand some of the shortcut keys you can use, as well as adjusting some of the tool properties. The next tool we're going to take a look at is the rectangle tool. Though you don't have as many options as working with the line tool, for instance, being able to curve the lines as you're drawing them, you do have a few extra options that are almost hidden, but are well worth your time. So what I want to do is go ahead to my line tool, and if I click and hold down, I get the other options of the other shapes, such as rectangle, ellipse, and polyline. So let's start with the rectangle tool. And if I just click and drag, we can pretty much make a decent rectangle. Now, one shortcut that's true in other programs such as Illustrator or Photoshop or even Flash is if you hold down your Shift key while clicking and dragging, you're going to get a perfect square. If you hold down your Option and Shift key, Alt-Shift on PC, you'll be clicking and dragging out a square from the dead center. Now, without holding down Option, I'm going to let go of my Option key for a minute, you'll be pulling out from a corner. So again, you have to hold down your Option key if you're on a Mac, Alt on a PC. Now, just like the line tool, if you hold down your O key and click and drag your mouse, you can adjust what size the stroke is going to be. So I'm going to hold down my O key. My cursor icon is going to change here. I'm going to click and drag, and I can get a larger stroke. Now, one other option I want to show you is the ability to automatically fill in what shapes you're drawing out. Each of the squares that we created, they're basically empty. It's just the outline. So what I want to do now is use the autofill option. So I come over here to my properties, and I'll select autofill. And now if I click and drag, I'm going to hold on my Shift key to make a square again, let go of the mouse, and it's going to be automatically filled. Now, to change what color I'm working with, I'm going to temporarily shrink my properties. So if I click white, click and drag now, we still have our autofill. So working with the rectangle tool, by using your different shortcut keys, you can change the width of your shapes, as well as whether it's going to be drawn from the corner or drawn out from the center. In addition to this, you can also set them to autofill using your tool properties. The next shape tool, or primitive, is referred to as the ellipse tool. Now, in other programs, this might be referred to as the oval tool or even the circle tool. Basically, you're making circular objects. So I'm going to go down to our shapes here. I'm going to click and hold down, and come down and select the ellipse tool. Now, similarly to the line and the rectangle tool, I can actually change the width of our stroke here simply by holding down my O key. If I click and drag, I can get a different width for my ellipse or circle. Now, to get a perfect circle, I'm going to hold down my Shift key, so it's not just an oval. And to do a circle from the center versus from the corner, I would hold down my Option key. or Alt on PC. So this is just holding down the Option key. Now if I hold down Shift in addition to this, I will get a perfect circle. So I'll just select all of these and delete them. Let's do Command A, Control A on PC, press Delete or Backspace. Now I can also work with this and create an autofill circle. So I'm going to expand my properties, come down and select autofill. So now if I click and drag out circle, if I let go of the mouse, it's going to automatically fill in with the selected color. So once again, there are basic shapes you can create with the ellipse tool, but if you combine those with your shortcut keys and your properties, you can do more than just the basics. If you're familiar with programs like Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Flash, Photoshop, you may be used to a tool called the Pen tool. There is a tool like that in Toon Boom Harmony, but it's not called the Pen tool. Instead, it's called the Polyline tool. So you'll find this simply coming down to your shape tools. You have your line, rectangle, ellipse, and last but not least is the Polyline tool. Now the way this works is simply clicking on a point, and then you can just move your cursor to a different area, click again, and it's kind of like connect the dots. So with this, you can create some pretty awesome shapes and even some abstract shapes. But you might be thinking, okay, that's great, but how do I do any type of curved line? Now, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, but once you get used to it, there's some pretty awesome things you can do with the Polyline tool. So I'm going to simply do Command A to select all. That's Control A on PC, and press Delete or Backspace. Now, in order to start using curves with your Polyline tool, you're going to create what's referred to as a Bezier curve, and you'll be able to control exactly how much something is curved by using direction handles. So I'll simply click once, and on my next point, instead of just simply clicking, I'm going to click and drag, and I'm pulling on the direction handles, and that's going to give my line a curve. So for the next point, click and drag, and have even more curves. Now, this can take a bit of getting used to, but it is a very powerful tool, especially for creating very smooth lines and arcs. In addition to this, you can also select options in your tool properties, as well as pay attention to what's happening with your cursor icons when you're creating your different shapes. So I'm going to do Select All again, Command A, Control A on PC, and I'll simply press Delete or Backspace. Now, in addition to working with your Bezier curves and working with your different anchor points, you can also set things in your options as well as pay attention to what's happening with your cursor. There's going to be little icons that will show you exactly what to do with your Polyline tool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click once and come down here to the bottom. I'll click again. I'm going to make a triangle. I'm going to come over here, not at the very top, but right here to one of the edges. If you notice, the icon has a small little circle. This basically means that I will have a closed shape. So if I click once, we now have a closed shape. Now I want to create another closed shape, but this time I'm going to use the very top of the triangle. So I'm going to hold down my Command key and click once in my camera view to deselect everything. And I'll make a separate triangle. I'm going to click once at the top. And now for the final click, I'm going to go up to the top. And if you notice, the icon changes, so you see this little plus sign. Now, in order to do this, you're going to have to make sure your options are set a certain way. So we'll go to our tool properties, and right now I have Snap to Contour turned on. If I turn this off, I'm going to make another triangle here. I'm going to hold down my Command key, click once in the camera view to deselect everything. And now, if I go up to the very top, it's not necessarily snapping right to that point. I'm going to zoom in so you can see. The points aren't coming directly together, but if we come over here and turn this back on, we'll draw one more triangle. I'm going to hold down my Command key, click once in the camera view to deselect everything. I'm going to zoom back out here. So with that option turned on, it's going to automatically snap right where it needs to, versus these other 2 points which don't connect. And I'll just come down here to our view and turn this to Fit to View. I'm going to hold my space bar to just grab this back to the center real quick. There you have it. This is our Polyline tool. You can create straight points as well as curved points. And this comes in handy when you need to create shapes that aren't exactly straight lines. By using your anchor points, direction handles, and Bezier curves, you can also create some beautiful curved lines. And this comes in handy especially if you're trying to trace something that's already been hand-drawn. Throughout this course, we're going to be using a lot of different shortcut keys. A few of those we've used with respect to the shape tools, for instance, holding down Option or holding down Shift. Now, in addition to this, we're going to be using other little shortcut keys so we can take control of moving around our interface or selecting items, even if we're on a different tool. To show you an example of this, what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and select my Polyline tool, and I'm just going to click a few points to make a decent shape here. What I want to do now is I'm going to simply hold down my Command key, that's Control on PC, and if you notice, I now have my selection tool. Now this is just a temporary thing because I'm holding down my Command key, because I'm still on the polyline tool. Once I release my keyboard, I have the polyline tool again. So to show you where this comes in handy, I'll hold down my Command key, and I can click once in the camera view area, and now when I let go of my keyboard, we have nothing selected. Now what this also comes in handy is I can hold down my Command key again, and I'll click just once on one of the lines here. Still holding down my Command key, I can click and drag this one particular line away from the triangle. Now I'll let go of my keyboard. I'm going to click Command once more and click into my camera view so nothing is selected. Now another shortcut I'll use often is the hand tool. To use the hand tool, come down here to select the hand tool, and this is going to allow you to move the area around so you can see a little bit better. It works really well if you're zoomed in, so you can move these different points around. So I'm going to go back to my normal view for a moment. I'll simply go to my zoom and come down and select Fit to View. And I'm going to go back to my polyline tool to show you the shortcut of how you can get to the hand tool. If you hold on your spacebar, instantly have the hand tool. And let off the spacebar, you have the tool that you're using originally. Now this works with any tool, probably with the exception of using the text tool. Of course, if you're using the text tool, then you may end up adding spaces to whatever you're typing. But whatever tool you're using, for instance, if you're using the brush tool, if I simply hold down my spacebar, I instantly have the hand tool. So those are two shortcuts you should definitely memorize. Holding down your Command key, and that's if you're on a Mac, or Control key if you're on a PC, will give you your select tool no matter what tool you're using. And holding down the spacebar will give you your hand tool no matter what tool you're using. With the exception of using the text tool, you'll be able to move around the view of your camera or drawing area. In addition to having tools like the line tool or rectangle tool or the polyline tool, you also have the brush tool. And it's a pretty powerful tool to use, especially if you have a stylus or a Wacom tablet. I'm going to move to my brush tool. I'm also going to take a look at my tool properties. You can see you have the basic setup, the maximum size, as well as different settings like smoothing, as well as you have a couple of little presets here. So I'm just going to do some quick little circles. And again, I'm using a stylus, so it is pressure sensitive. I'm going to make this a little more obvious. I'm going to increase our size here. So the heavier I press down, the broader the stroke is going to be. And this is mimicking an actual paintbrush. Now, in addition to using the properties guide and changing our size there, you can also use the keyboard shortcut. I'm going to hold down my O key, and I can click and drag out and change the brush size. I'm going to do Command Z. And you also have several settings. So if I click on brush number 3, it has a different setting. There are a couple of settings that actually work with a fixed width. So it's not going to change even if the pressure changes. So I'm going to go ahead and clear my screen here. I'll do Command A, Control A on PC, and press Delete or Backspace. What I want to do now is I want to work with some of the options that you have with your brush. Decent brush size. So I'm going to draw out a couple of little circles here. What I want to show you is the different options you have with respect to painting. So I'm going to bring this back up so I can take a look at my colors for a moment. I'm going to select the color red just so we can see a difference. And I'll go back to my tool properties for the brush. And what I want to do is show you what is going to happen by default with the brush tool, as well as with some of the other options you have. So I'll simply draw some lines straight over this first circle. And this is what would happen normally using the brush tool if you're painting over something. Now the second option I want to select is draw behind. So once that option is selected, if I decide to draw or scribble right on top of the circle, it's drawing behind that circle. Last but not least, I'm going to select this other option, which is only going to paint what has already been drawn. So those are a few of the options you have when painting or working on different pieces of artwork in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. Now, in addition to the presets, you can go in and create your own brush. So I want to show you that real quick. So we'll simply do Command A, Control A on PC. And let's go ahead and delete these. I'll simply press Delete or press Backspace if you're on a PC. Each one of the little settings we were doing earlier, this is just a little temporary setting. But if I want to make a permanent brush, I would simply come up here to this little arrow. I'm going to click. I get an expanded area here. So I can start saying what the maximum size would be and what would the minimum size be. And I can even come in and adjust the smoothing. Now, what smoothing does, it's going to autocorrect anything that I'm drawing out my hand. So if I want the computer to really help me out, I'll have this number higher. So I'm just going to bring this up just a little bit, maybe to about 7. And last but not least, I can even come in and change what shape I'm going to be using. Now, I'm going to use a slanted little shape here, mainly because I want to show you what you can do even if you're only using a mouse. So I'll close this out. And right now I'm still using the stylus, so I'm going to get a nice little thick and thin happening there. And if you notice, I keep painting this, but my lines are disappearing. And that's mainly because I still have one of the repaint brush settings turned on. So turn that off. Now that's drawing with my stylus. And what I want to show you is I'm going to now grab my mouse, which does not have any pressure sensitivity to it. And I can still get some nice thick and thins, mainly because of the shape that I'm using. Now, if we wanted to save this brush, the last thing I want to show you is you come over here to the presets. I'm going to click this little plus sign, and we can call this brush number 4, and I'm just going to put in here TR for Tony Ross, and I'll click OK. If I go to brush 2, I still have brush 2 here. I can come down and I can select brush 4 TR, and I've got all the settings I just created. If you want to get rid of that brush, you simply come over and click on the little pencil with the minus. That brush is gone. Now, if you're using Toon Boom Harmony Advanced or Toon Boom Harmony Premium, you do have other features like adding in texture and things like that. But for Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, you still have a lot going on with being able to change the brush tip as well as the thick and thin of your brush and saving those out individually. Another powerful drawing tool in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials is the pencil tool. Now, there are differences between the pencil tool in Harmony Essentials versus Harmony Premium or Advanced. For instance, in Harmony Premium or Advanced, you have options like you can vary the width of the pencil stroke just by the pressure on your stylus. Now, in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, you don't have that option. That being said, you still have some pretty powerful tools. So I'm going to simply go and select my pencil tool, and I'll go over to my properties. I'm going to expand this so we can see the different options we have. You can change the size manually in properties, as well as with all the other tools. You can hold down your O key and click and drag out a different size. And you also have different presets. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to make the brush a little bit larger. I'm going to hold on my O key and click and drag out. And I'm just going to draw out some simple little circles. Now, one of the things you want to keep in mind is when you're using the pencil tool versus using the brush tool, it's really going to pay attention to where anchor points are and where paths are. And in order to demonstrate that a little bit better, I'm going to turn on outlines, and we'll be able to see exactly where the different anchor points and paths are. So I'm going to simply press my K key on my keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so you can see what's going on. Now with the pencil tool, you can see exactly where the paths have been drawn, and these little squares here are letting us know that this path is not complete. Now this would come in handy, especially if we're trying to fill any of these shapes in. For instance, if I decide to grab my paint bucket and try to fill one of these right now, it's not going to work because we have this hole here. So I'll go back to my pencil tool, and I'm going to change one of the settings in tool properties, so we'll automatically have this close. And I'll go over to my properties, and right at the bottom, I want to select Auto Close Gap. Now I want to draw out one more circle, and this time I'll just let these touch. And if you notice, these lines, even though they're touching the same way the lines here are touching, there's no more little yellow squares. And this basically means this is a closed shape. So now if I try to use my paint bucket, it will automatically fill in. So let's go back to my pencil tool. Now you don't have the option of changing different tips or even adding textures as you would in Toon Boom Advanced or Toon Boom Premium, but you still can save your different pencils. So if we decided to alter this a little bit and change what our smoothing would be, we can still save this out. Call this pencil number 5 TR. Click OK. And we see the label there. And if you want to get rid of it, simply click the delete brush button and we're done. Now, if you're working on anything that you need a constant width, the pencil tool is definitely what you want to work with, more so than the brush tool. And that's where this tool comes in handy. One of the tools we're going to be using a lot throughout this course, and you're going to be using a lot when you use Harmony in general, is the Select tool. Now, beyond just simply selecting items, it has a lot of extra controls just by using the tool properties. The Select tool is the very top tool here, and the black arrow. And what I want to show you now is I can simply just kind of draw a little lasso here to select different elements that are on the page. And the other option I have is to come here and set this to marquee, so I can just click and drag and select a large area. I'm just going to click on my camera view to deselect everything. And I want to show you some of the extra little properties you have here. I'm going to zoom in. For example, I can turn on snap to contour. And if I grab this little circle here, it starts snapping when I try to move this to different areas. Now, if you're like me, you'll probably keep that option turned off. There's also snap to line and snap to grid. Now, snap to contour, snap to grid, and snap to align, those help you, especially if you're trying to keep something very symmetrical. If you're working a little more freestanding or a little more organic, you may not want to turn those on. So I'm going to zoom out here and show you another option, and that is selecting by color. So I'm going to first deselect everything on my screen. And in Tool Properties, I'm going to select this red arrow. Now, using Select by Color, anytime I select a certain color, say red, it's going to select all of the red that is on the screen at the time. So if I click red right here, it's grabbing all of those elements. If I click blue, it's selecting all of the blue elements. So if I decided to move all of this, I can. I'm going to undo that real quick, Command Z. Now I want to show you some other options you have. So I'm going to expand our tool properties. What we're going to do next is we're going to use some of the flipping options that are available with the Select tool. I'm going to first turn off my Select by Color. And now I'm going to simply click to select this little blue scribble here. I'm going to zoom in. And I can actually flip this horizontally as well as vertically, or changing the degrees. And I can still move this around just by hand. I'm going to zoom out here. And last but not least, I want to show you this one thing. We have everything that's drawn on this side. It's drawn with the brush. And this side is actually drawn out using the pencil tool. So what I want to show you, I'm going to select everything here. And at the base, we have the pencil selection. I can change how thick or thin the lines are. Now, it doesn't affect anything that's done with a brush, but anything that's done with the pencil or with the stroke, we can actually alter the size even after it's been drawn. So the pencil tool is pretty versatile, and you can use that just to move items, flip items, or you can even change the width of a stroke after it's been drawn. One of my favorite tools to use in Toon Boom Harmony is the Cutter tool, and this definitely helps you edit when you're working on projects and getting rid of extra points. So to get to the Cutter tool, I'm going to simply go over to my Select tool and come down and select Cutter. Now, by default, it's set up with the marquee. What you can do with the Cutter tool is I can come here, for instance, in any item and any shape that's actually crossed over, I can select that, and I can go ahead and delete it by pressing Delete or Backspace. I'm going to undo that real quick. Now, the reason I really like this tool has nothing to do with using that technique, which is really the slower way of doing it. What I want to do instead is simply come over here and turn it from marquee to lasso. And I also want to make sure that the mouse gesture is turned on or selected. What this does, I can do a simple quick gesture like drawing and saying I want this part moved, and it'll delete it automatically. So I can simply delete this line or this line or this line. Now this works whether you're using a brush stroke or a pencil stroke. So on the pencil side here, I can do the same thing. And to show you a little more of what I'm working with, I'm going to grab the brush tool here and just make a little A here. Select the Cutter tool and get rid of all of the extra lines. So I have a triangle. So even though you can use the Cutter tool in the marquee mode, my preference is to turn it on lasso and use my mouse gestures. And that allows me to edit my images and drawings a lot quicker. With the contour editor, you can go in and edit or manipulate any drawings that you've actually done, and that's with a pencil stroke or if you've actually used the brush. Now, if you're coming from a Flash background, you may be used to just doing this with the Select tool, but in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, you're going to be doing this with a different tool, and it looks like the Select tool, but it's the white arrow and it's referred to as the contour editor. So what I'm going to do is come over here and I'm going to select Contour Editor, and what I want to first do is go to this simple line over here in our pencil, the L. And if you notice, my cursor changes once I get close to the L. So I can click and pull, and if you notice the line, it's showing exactly what the new curve would be. So once I let go of the mouse, that's where we have our new adjustment. In contrast, if we work with any brush line, it's going to be on the outside versus internal. And I'll show you that real quick. Move over to our brush. If I move to the edge here, as soon as I select this, you see that it's nothing in the center, but these are just on the outside of the shape. But you can still adjust the contours here. Simply zoom out. I'll do Shift and the letter M. I'm going to click once just to deselect everything. And to do a really quick demo of the difference, I'm going to grab my brush tool and make my brush just a little bit larger here. And we'll also grab the pencil tool and do the same. So if we go back to our contour editor, with the brush, you can see all of the different anchor points. And those are on the outside of the shape. Now if I select the pencil, you see all of the anchor points, and the path is right down the middle. So you want to keep this in mind when you start editing shapes. Another thing you can do with the contour editor, especially when you're working with strokes, is you can select just different parts of the stroke and simply press delete. And what you can do with any of the brush strokes you've made is you can have a really nice thick and thin effect applied to it beyond what was originally drawn. Come up here and simply click one of the points and just move this up a bit. And so now we have a more thick and thin brush stroke. So with the contour editor, you can go in after a mark has been made, whether that's a pencil stroke or a brush stroke, and go in and tweak that until you get it exactly the way you want it. If you're going to be drawing directly in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, a tool you should really get used to is the Smooth Editor. It can go in and remove any extra points that may make your drawing look a little more shaky or basically a little less smooth than you'd like it to look. So I have two lines here basically drawn out a shape and just duplicated it. And what I'm going to do at the top line is use the Smooth Editor to make it look a little less hand-drawn and a little cleaned up. So I'm going to go and find my Smooth Editor, and you will locate this right under the Contour Editor. For my options, I want to set this to a brush. And secondly, I want to go ahead and select this other option that's going to actually show all of my control points or show all of my anchor points. Now, when it comes to vectors, the more points you have, it's going to be a little less smooth. So what I'm going to do now is paint over some of these areas to remove some of the extra points, thereby making it a lot smoother. So by default, my brush is not that big, and I can keep painting over these, but you don't really see any difference just yet. So I want to make a few changes. One, I want to make the brush a little larger, so I'm going to simply hold down my O key, click and drag this out. And then the amount of smoothness, I'm going to change this. I'm going to bring it up to about 40. So now if I decide to paint an area, you'll notice the amount of points have disappeared. And I can just keep painting until I get it exactly how I want it. So the more you paint over a line, the more points it's going to pull. And again, the fewer points, the smoother the final piece will look. Now, a nice thing you can do is turn on and off the points so you can see the before and after. So if you look here on the bottom one, you see exactly how rough this looked and how much we've cleaned it up in the new version. So even if you come in and drawn something by hand and it's not as smooth as you would like it, you can use the Smooth Editor and come in and remove any of those extra anchor points, and it'll give you a much cleaner vector shaped line. When you first start working in Harmony Essentials, you may realize that there's not a lot of colors here to start with. Well, that's done by design, mainly because it's a best practice to create your own colors and create your own palette when creating your animations or characters. That being said, let me go ahead and show you how simple it is to start adding some colors to your palette. Now, by default, you have black, white, red, green, blue, and what's referred to as the vectorized line. Now, the vectorized line refers to anything that you're scanning in, and if you decided to use the vectorization process, that is the color that it's going to be using, which by default is black. So what I want to show you is a simple color I use when I'm ever sketching out things. And this is based on the color erase blue pencils that a lot of traditional animators use. So I'm going to go here in my color area and just click this little plus sign to add a color. Whatever color you've had selected, that's what it's going to duplicate. Just to show you what's happening, I'm going to go ahead and delete this color, select the minus button to remove it, and this time I'm going to select blue. And if I add a color, it's going to duplicate the blue color. Now, it doesn't really matter where you start because you can always go in and manipulate these colors. And that's what I'm going to do now. So to do this, I want to simply double click on our color New 2, and we have our color picker. Now, I'm going to simply call this Sketch Blue. And again, this is based off of the color erase blue pencil, and it's kind of my preference when I'm sketching out ideas. So it's going to be 50 for red, and these numbers go from 0 to 255. Green, it's going to be 130, and you can already see this is starting to turn into blue. And for the blue, it's going to be 200. Last but not least, I can even adjust the transparency or opacity, and that's going to be done using the alpha. And I'm going to set this to 178. Now, why 178? It's about 70% of the opacity, so I want it a little bit clear. It looks a little more like a marker when you're working on things, and it's just the way I like to work. So now that we have that done, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. If I go and grab a brush and make a larger brush, you can see what's happening with the colors here. Now to see this in better detail, I'm going to click over to my drawing mode for a moment, and you can see exactly how the translucent colors work. you can see the opacity showing up a lot better. And this is what I would use when I'm sketching out any type of object before I go in and start doing my cleanup work. So to add another color to your palette is not difficult at all, and a best practice is to make sure you label each and every color you add. Instead of saying blue or red, you may want to say color of my character's hair or the color of their shoes. In addition to creating your own custom colors, you can also create custom palettes. Now, for each document you create, it does create its own palette, but we can add additional palettes. So you can do things like have a palette for each character. Now we're going to take a look at our color area over here, and I'm going to expand the view of our palettes, and it's showing the name of the document that we're currently working on, which is color. So each time you create a document, the document itself has its own palette. So what I'm going to do now is create a second palette, and that is going to be for our character, Koi, the caveman. Now in order to do this, I'm going to simply come over here to this plus sign and click on this to add a new palette. I'm going to call this one Koi. I'm just going to hit the spacebar. If you notice, just by hitting the spacebar, it's automatically going to give me an underscore. And we're going to call this Koi Caveman 01. So I'll click OK. And now we have our default color of black. And what I want to do is add a few things here. We're going to need to add a color for Koi's hair, his skin, his clothing, and his club. So I'm going to add a new color. And I'm going to call this Koi's skin. Now the reason I didn't just simply call it skin is because I am going to have other characters within this document, so I will have multiple palettes, so I don't want to have the name skin used over and over. I need to know whose skin we're talking about. I'm going to move around until I find the exact color that I'm looking for, and that looks pretty decent. So I'll go ahead and close this out, and I want to add a couple of other colors here. We're going to add in the color for Koi's hair as well as his clothing and his club. So this will be Koi's hair. And you can adjust things like hue and saturation and even changing the values. And this can make it a little easier to find the exact color you want it to use. All right, so his hair is kind of this reddish brown. And what I want to do now is go up to value, maybe lighten it just a little bit. Looks good. And this will be Koi's club. I actually may go ahead and add in a gradient. So instead of this being a solid color, I'll select gradient. And it'll start from one color. And I'll select this other part here and do a lighter color. Last but not least, we're going to go ahead and add in color for Koi's little robe here. So now we not only have our original document palette, which would be color, but we also have our Koi Caveman palette. Now this will come in handy, especially if we need to update or change any of the colors in the future. By setting things in palettes, you're able to access any of the custom colors you've made pretty easily. Now that we've created our custom palette, the next thing we're going to do is paint our little character. And we're going to use the paint tool as well as show you how to use some of the options and properties to fill in gaps and also paint things that aren't painted yet. So I'm going to go and select my paint tool and its little paint bucket icon here. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I want to fill in just the arms and legs for our character. So I'll select the skin color. And so I'll go ahead and click where the arms and legs are. I'm going to click here once and click the individual fingers. And I'll go ahead and click the feet. Now next I'm going to go ahead and color the head. And we're going to run into some problems because not all of our gaps are filled in. So let's simply click for the head. Now if you look at this, you'll notice not only the skin is colored, but we've also colored the hair, which we don't want to do. So let's undo that. Command Z, Control Z on PC. And now we're going to take a look at one of the other options you have when working with the paint tool. I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in here. And right here, right next to the ear is where that large gap is. And what I want to do is create an invisible line so I can color the skin as well as color the hair a different color. So to do this, I'm going to go to my paint tool. I'm going to come down and select stroke. Now what I want to do is draw out a simple line from the hair to the ear to close the gap. Now once I've done this, I'm going to get a message that says you've added a stroke to the drawing, but it will not be visible unless you activate Show Strokes from the View menu. Now to show this, you can simply go View, come all the way down to Show, and Show Strokes. Now normally I simply use my quick key, which is simply pressing the letter K. But now we've done that, we can see where our little invisible line is. What I want to do is go back to our normal paint tool, and I want to click in the face area once more. And now we have our skin color, and it's going to be separate from where the hair is. So now we can go to the hair, and his hair is colored. Now we no longer need to see our outline, so I'm going to simply press the K key, and we have everything back to normal. Now hold on my spacebar, and let's move Koi right back to the center here. I've been basically using the paint tool the way you would in a program like Photoshop or Illustrator or even Flash. But what I want to show you now is some of the other tools you have with the paint tool, such as using it as a lasso. So by default, I have this set at lasso right now. And this basically means if I decide to draw this little loop right here, it's going to automatically fill in everything that it's touched. Now that's a little bit of a problem because it's colored things that I didn't want colored. So I'm going to undo that, Command Z, and I'll go over to my tool properties and I want to select Paint Unpainted. And now I also want to grab the club color, which is our gradient. So I'm going to simply do another little loop here. And last but not least, we'll do the same thing with Koi's loincloth. I'm just going to drag this little line. And there we have them fully colored. Now, there's one other trick I do want to show you that you have options with respect to filling in colors. So I'm going to grab my paintbrush for a moment. And I'm just going to make a little circle here. I'm going to leave a gap there on purpose. And let's grab our paint tool. And I'll try to fill this in. And it's not going to fill in. Now, what you can do, I'm going to expand our properties window here a moment. I can tell it to close small gaps, and that's not working. Let's try it again. Let's try to close medium gaps. And that filled in even though there's a gap there. And you can manually adjust this as well by using the little counter here and saying exactly how large the gap should be. So now you've learned to use the paint tool as well as some of the different options you have to close very large gaps. Now sometimes when you're working on a project, you're going to have to update the colors that you've used. There are a couple of ways you can do this in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, and one of them is extremely powerful, updating your colors dynamically. But before we get into that, I do want to show you a couple of little things you can do manually to update your colors. Now, let's say that I do want to change something going on with Koi's hair. So I'm going to zoom in and hold on my spacebar to get the hand tool for a moment. And I have my selection tool. So this is actually drawn out in different parts. So I'm just going to click on the outlines of Koi's hair. Hold down my Shift key. I can click on the other parts of his hair. So that's just the black outline of Koi's hair. And let's say that I want to change what that color is. I can actually come over here and then simply select a different color. And it looks a little bit crazy right now, but instead, let's go ahead and click Default, and we'll add a new color. We'll double click here, and we'll just call this Koi's hair outline. And at this point, I'm going to go in and start changing that. I'm looking at this as I'm changing it, which kind of helps out. That looks pretty good right there. And there is our updated hair. Now, another thing we can do, let's go ahead and zoom out here. If we want to change what's happening with the skin in that same way, in several different areas, I can use my Select tool and then do Select by Color. If I click on the skin, it's automatically going to select wherever the skin is. And again, I can change that to whatever color I'd like. It's playing around there. I'm going to undo that. And I want to show you this one last trick. One of the most powerful things that's in Toon Boom software is the way that it handles color. And that is, each color that you create has its own little ID. So imagine if we've done 5 minutes of animation. We've got frame on top of frame of working with Koi, and he's moving around, and we get a note that actually his loincloth should be purple. So that's hundreds and hundreds of frames that we've already done. But because Toon Boom Harmony has a dynamic color system, we can go in to our palette and change that, and it'll change it for every single frame. So if you can simply double click on the loincloth, and we can update it to the color it's supposed to be, and we are set. So whether you're changing something frame by frame manually, or using Toon Boom's dynamic color system, you can change your colors pretty quickly. Whether you're working with backgrounds or creating a character, the one section you're going to be using a lot is the timeline, and specifically adding layers. So I want to show you some of the basics of how layers work and also a few shortcuts that you can use. Now I've got our basic little sketch here, and this is our character Earl Lee that's going to be part of our scene. And what I want to do now is show you exactly how you would go about adding the different layers for the character. Now, one of the first things I want to do, whenever you create a layer by default, it's going to be automatically called either a drawing layer or whatever type of layer you have. So I want to change the name of this. I'm going to simply double click right on the text here, and I'm just going to call this sketch. Now, if we double click directly on the text, we can change the name of the layer, but also if you double click on this icon, we'll get the layer properties and you can change the name here. Let's go ahead and close that. And the other thing I would like to do is talk about the different types of layers you have. The Add a Layer button is right here with this little plus sign. So if you click here once, you see different types of layers like bone, camera, color card, drawing, and a few others. For right now, we're just going to be concerned with adding drawing layers. So I'm going to go ahead and select drawing, and it's going to pop up with this little window. At this point, I can go in and start adding layers. I can either click add, or I can click add and close. Now the difference, if you know you're going to need more than one layer added, add may be the way to go. But if you only need one layer, you can use add and close. So for right now, I'm just going to type in the layer. I'm going to type in eyes, and I'm going to simply click add and close. So now I have another layer, and this is called eyes. So if I go ahead and select that layer, I can go in and start working on a new layer and doing any cleanup work. Now I'm going to go and select my paintbrush. And if you notice, instantly that other layer started getting very dim. And this is just set up in our preferences, and it helps you to trace out things when you're working on them. I'm going to zoom in. So for the eyes layer, I'm just going to go ahead and draw out what the eyes would look like. And now I'm going to simply press Shift M to go back to our normal view. Now I want to add a few extra layers, and I want to show you some shortcuts that you can do. So instead of going back to our plus sign to add another drawing layer, I simply want to click this little icon here to add a drawing layer. And this is going to be for the mouth. And so I'll click add. And if you look at the base, we've now added another layer, but our window is still open. And the next thing I want to add is the hair. I'm going to click add. And for now, we'll just add another one for wings. So I'll click add and close. Now, anytime you're working with animation, especially if you're working with cutout or limited animation, anything you're going to want to move, you're going to have it on its own separate layer, which is what I've done here. So for each of these layers, I can go in and select a different layer and draw out what's needed. So for the mouth layer, I'll just draw out the mouth, and I'll select the hair layer, and I'll draw out what his hair is supposed to look like. And last but not least, I'll draw out the wings. So now that I have all these different layers drawn out, what you also may want to do is turn off the visibility of the layer, or sometimes even lock the layer. A good practice I like to do when working is if I've drawn out my sketch layer, I will lock that layer. So I come over here to the lock icon, and I'll lock that layer. And sometimes you may need to turn off the visibility of a layer. So I can even turn off what our sketch layer looks like, so I can see what the rest of the items look like when they're drawn in. So when working with your timeline and layers, remember your shortcuts of adding layers and adding and closing layers, and that way you can keep your pipeline moving pretty smooth. If you're familiar with traditional animation, one of the things that happens is you'll have several sheets of paper, and you'll be working with those using a light box and drawing out different frames of your animation. This is done in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials using onion skin. Now, if you're familiar with working with programs like Flash, the onion skin in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials is a little different and a lot more powerful. We're going to go in and draw out several frames for our eyes, and we're going to create a blink. So I'll select my eye layer, I'm going to get my paintbrush, and I want to zoom in here. Simply press my 2 key, hold on my space bar, and just get the eyes dead center so I can work on these. And what I want to do now is I'm going to select the very next frame on the eye layer. By doing this, there's nothing that's visible right now because we don't have onion skin turned on. But what I can do is come here on the eye layer and simply click the onion skin icon. And now I can see what is in the previous frame. So what I want to do is just go ahead and draw out our eyes on the second frame here. I'm going to do a simple 3-frame blink and have these squash down just a little bit. And now I'll select the very next frame. And I can see both frames 1 and 2. So I'm going to draw out the third frame here. I'm going to switch this down just a little bit more and have the eyes close. And one other thing I want to show you, basically you'll see the previous images in red, but if I select frame 1, you'll see the next images in green. A good example of this is if I select frame 2, we see frame 1 in red and what frame 3 would be in green. In addition to this, you can also control how many frames your onion skin will show by using the guides at the top of your timeline. And if you look right next to the playhead, you'll see this little blue area. So you can stretch these guides out or shorten them, and that will show only the frames that you have highlighted using the guides. In addition to turning on your onion skin in general, you can also turn your onion skin on and off for different layers. For instance, we can go in and turn on the mouth or the hair layer just so we can see what's going on. And to turn all of the onion skin off, we'll simply go over to our onion skin icon and click once. So by using your onion skin, you can work with your animations and seeing the previous as well as the next drawings that you're working on. Now that we have our eyes drawn out, we're about to start working on one of my favorite features in Toon Boom Harmony. It's also one of the more confusing ones if you've not used anything like this before, and that is called drawing substitutions. Each layer that we've actually created is referred to as a drawing. It's not a symbol, it's just simply a drawing. That being said, in our earlier lesson, we drew out 3 different frames for our eyes. Go to my eye layer. So we drew frame 1, frame 2, and then frame 3. So we drew out this little blink. Now we have our drawing layer for the eyes, and we have 3 different drawings that we've created already. Each of these drawings can be called on at any given time. I'm going to bring up my timeline a little bit so we can see a little better. And I also want to zoom in just on the eye layer. And I'm actually going to come over here and I want to solo this layer. So we're just looking at the eyes. So we have frame 1, frame 2, and frame 3 that we've drawn out. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to show you how you can access these different frames at any given time. So I'm going to go to my library and I want to extend this down just a little bit. And you look here and you see this little window that simply says drawing substitution. So on our timeline, we're on frame 3, and in our drawing substitution, it's also showing drawing 3. But the drawing itself is not limited to the actual frame number. In short, I can go up here to drawing substitutions and I can drag this back so it's only showing frame 2. And if you look now on our screen, you see frame 2. So as far as the frames are concerned, frame 2 is showing drawing 2, and because of our change, frame 3 is also showing drawing 2. Now, we're going to do this a little bit further. Select frame 1. What we're going to do is take all 3 of these frames and make sure they're only showing the very first drawing, which is the eyes that are open. So I'll select frame 1, hold down my Shift key, select frame 3, and I'm going to go to my drawing substitutions and move this so it's only on frame 1. Go to drawing substitutions, and I'm just going to temporarily put this on drawing 2. Now I'm going to pull this back to drawing 1. Now if we look down at our timeline, all 3 frames are now showing drawing 1. We're going to take this a step further, and I want to extend the exposure of the eye drawing layer, and I'll simply select frame 60, and I'm going to use a quick key and simply press F5. So now we have 60 frames, and it's only showing drawing 1. What I want to do is I'm going to move up to frame 10. What you have to remember is drawings 2 and 3 haven't been deleted. They've been stored, so they are still available. We just have to call them. So now at frame 10, I can go to my drawing substitutions and move that to frame 2. So if I move my playhead backward, you see this very thin line here, and this basically lets us know that we've had a drawing substitution. It's not a keyframe, it is simply a drawing substitution. And we'll go a couple more frames, 2 more frames, and we're going to take this to frame 3. So now it goes from frame 1 to frame 2 to frame 3. Now I want to let the eyes close for a few frames, and then we're going to open them. To open them, I'm going to show you other methods of calling on your drawing substitutions. Now we've been using our library, but in addition to this, you can also use the parameters that are right on your timeline. So right here, if you notice it says 3, I can move this backward to 2, and we have a different drawing there. And I'm going to move this forward 1 more frame, and now I want to use drawing 1. I don't use the library, and I don't use parameters either. I use the shortcut keys that are on my keyboard. So to move backward and forward in your drawing substitutions, you can use your open and close brackets, which are right next to the P key. So now, to move one drawing backward, I'm going to simply press my open bracket key. Now if I decide to scrub the playhead, we have a simple blink. And to do the same kind of blink again, I'm just going to use my keyboard shortcuts and scrub with the playhead. This is the way that I normally work. I'm going to move the playhead forward, and I want to press the close bracket to move forward. Move the playhead forward again, close bracket again, move it forward a few more frames, use my open bracket to go backwards 1, move my playhead, and move my bracket key again. So once you get used to the concept, you can either use your library and adjust your drawing substitutions, or the parameters, or use the method that I do and simply use your bracket keys to pan back and forward through your drawings. Now, this isn't only used for blinks, you can also use this for hands, and this is definitely the way lip sync is done because all of your mouths will be the same drawings. So they'll be calling on different drawing substitutions to give the illusion of speech. But we'll be covering that in the lip sync chapter. There are 2 different ways that you can manipulate your layers to really speed up your production pipeline. One of those is to duplicate a layer, and the other is to clone a layer. Now, the difference is if you duplicate a layer, basically you can go into each one of those drawing layers and manipulate your drawings individually, and it doesn't affect the original drawing that you duplicated it from. In contrast, if you clone a layer, anything you do to the original layer is going to happen to the cloned layer. To better illustrate this, what I want to do is do a little bit of work with our mosquito's wings. So I'm going to come down to my layer, and I want to select the wings layer. I'm going to right click, and I want to go and select duplicate selected layer. Now, as soon as we've done that, we end up with another layer that says wings_1. What I want to use is reposition all drawings, and I can click on these wings and just move these off to the side here. And so you see where the original wings are, and this is my duplicate. So I'm going to go to my select tool, and I can move pieces around individually, and I can even come in and manipulate the wings, and it's not going to affect the original. Now, duplicating a layer does have its place. For instance, if I had a whole swarm of mosquitoes, maybe I'd want some to look a little bit different. I would actually keep duplicating them, and that way I can manipulate each drawing layer. But what I want to do with our current mosquito, I'm going to clone a layer versus duplicating a layer. That way, anything that I do to the original wing layer, it's also going to automatically affect the cloned layer. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to go ahead and delete our duplicated wings layer. And for wings, I'm actually going to change the name. I'm just going to make it wing. And in our drawing area, I want to go up here, and I want to select this top wing. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Simply press backspace or delete. And on my timeline, I want to right click, and I want to clone the selected layer drawings only. Now, just so we can keep everything in order, I'm going to change the name of wing 1. I'm going to make this the back wing. Just put _B, and the one that's on top, I'll do _F for front. Now, this is the tricky part. I'm going to select this wing, and this is our front wing, and I want to move this. But if you note, there's no wing right under it. Well, the reason that is the case is this is a cloned drawing. So any movement of this drawing, it's automatically going to happen on the other layer. So how do we get around this? I'm going to come down and use a tool called the transform tool. And so the front wing, I actually have that exactly where I want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and select the back wing instead. And this little blue dot here is a pivot point. So I'm going to temporarily move this up so I can rotate the wing. And I'm going to move my cursor right to the edge here so we can actually rotate this. And I'm going to rotate the second wing. Let go of the mouse. And now we actually have both of our wings, and they're in two different places. Now, last but not least, I want to go ahead and color our wings. So what I want to do is select my front wing, go to my paint bucket tool, and I'm going to use a trick that we talked about in an earlier chapter, how to use your different paint tools. So I'm going to select stroke. I'm going to press the letter K just so I can see the outline. And let me zoom in so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to close this gap here. And I want to go to my colors. I'm going to select the wings color. And now what I want to do is fill this wing. So let's go back to our paint tool. And I'm just going to click. And not only did we fill the very front wing, but the back wing was instantly filled. Now, the reason this happened is because this is a clone, so anything we do to one wing is automatically going to happen to the other. Let me go back to actual size. I'm simply going to do Shift and the letter M. I'm going to simply press the letter K to turn off our outlines. And just to show even further what's happening with our clone, I can grab the paintbrush, and anything I decide to paint on one wing is automatically going to show up on the other. So whether you use cloning or duplicating, it will depend on what you need it for. Anytime you're trying to do something organic, say a whole swarm of mosquitoes, or maybe even a pack of stampeding elephants, maybe you'll want to duplicate because that way you can go in and manipulate each of your drawings so not everything looks alike. In contrast, if you've got this massive space armada of all of these ships, then you'd probably want to use cloning because that way each of the ships will be identical to the other. When you start working with your character design or even working in an animated scene, something that can help you keep everything organized is using layer groups. Now, if you're familiar with working with a program like Flash, you might refer to these like a layer folder. So in order to show you what I'm talking about, I'm going to make my timeline a little more visible here. And what I want to do is select all the parts I have currently of my mosquito. Now, we haven't added on the abdomen or the legs or anything like that. But for right now, I want to go ahead and group all of these into a simple layer group. So I'll select the front wing. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and select the sketch layer. Now all of my layers are selected, so I'll simply right-click and I'll select Group Selection. Now all of these are in this little group. I'm going to go ahead and change the name, so I'll simply double-click directly on the text. And our mosquito character is actually named Earl, so I'm going to call this group Earl. And let's say we also had a background. We've also got the other character in the scene, Coy. So in order to see all of that and make things a little less complex when we're working in our scene, I'll simply click this little box icon here. And now everything's collected inside that group, and it's even locked for us. So this is a pretty simple way of keeping your timeline clean when you're working on things. If things get a little bit cluttered, consider using layer groups. So when you're working in Toon Boom Harmony, the one thing that might be a little different for you is you're noticing this strange gray background. Why isn't it white? What's going on here? The deal is, nothing is actually in the background. If we were to export this right now, it would be exporting with a transparent background. And that's kind of what the gray represents. So what are you going to do for your background? If you're familiar with a program like Flash, you might be looking for a way to change your background color. Now that's not immediately available, so you might be thinking, well, maybe I should grab a rectangle and just make a large rectangle of color in the background. There's a much easier way, and it's kind of based in traditional animation. It's called the color card. Now in order to use this, I'm going to simply come down to my layers, click on our plus sign here, and select the color card. Now, what's happened is we now see this white background with these gray squares. The gray squares aren't necessarily there, it just simply means that this layer is selected. And maybe you're thinking, this is great, but I really can't see what's going on with the wings because the background's white and the wings are white. So how do you change the color? Come down to our timeline. I'm going to double click on the color card icon, and at the base here, it's showing me this large white area. If I click once, I can now change what color the background is going to be. And that looks pretty decent for now, so I'll simply close this out and close out my layer properties. And I'll select the Earl group so I can see the background without those little squares on it. Now, the color card is automatically set pretty far in the background. In addition to that, you're not going to have to extend the frames for the entire part of the animation or the scene. It will automatically update with however many frames you've added. So whether you need a permanent background color or you simply need to take a quick look at how your character would look against a color cards are a great option. Now, if you've been following along, up until this point, we've been working on our little mosquito character here, and I've been drawing in the camera view. There is a more refined way of working, and I want to share with you my normal pipeline where I would create my initial sketches, usually in camera view, but to do my detailed work and cleanup work, I'll switch over to drawing view. I'm going to go ahead and create the torso or the thorax, and then the abdomen, and also a legs layer. And I'm going to clean those up using the drawing view. I'm going to go ahead and expand my timeline so I can see a little bit better here. I'm going to add a couple of drawing layers. And so we'll add in the thorax. And I also want to add the tail or the abdomen. Let's add that one. And we'll do legs front and legs back. So I have all these different parts. I'm going to go to the thorax layer. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a rough version of this. I'm going to grab my red color here. And I'm just going to rough out our little prehistoric mosquito here. I'm going to rotate my screen. I'm going to do Command and Option. And this is just so I can draw this out a little more the way I'd like to. Do Shift M to get back to normal. And let's go to our abdomen layer. And we'll draw this out as well. And that's just a little more refined than the initial sketch. Let's do Shift M. And the front legs, try to have those all coming out from the same area. And then let's go to the back legs. Now, we have all of these on different layers, but it's a little bit confusing, especially when you look at the way the legs are. So we're now going to use our drawing view. So I'm going to go ahead and select the thorax layer. And at the very top of the screen here, you see camera. As we've been drawing the entire time in the camera view, I want to click and go to drawing. And now I can see very clearly just the thorax that I've just drawn in here. And I can go in and start cleaning this up. I'm going to grab my black paint. And we'll now go to our abdomen and we'll do the same thing. And we can always rotate and move things around the same way we did when working in our camera view. This helps out a lot because you're working a lot more refined and you don't have all of the other distractions of like the rest of the character. And we can clean up the line a little bit. We'll select that. Let's do Option, Shift, and the letter S. And that's Alt, Shift, S on PC. And I'll do the same for the top here. Clean up a little bit of our work. And last but not least, I can go in, grab Select Tool, and select by color option, click on our red, and delete. So now when I go back to our camera view, you can see our cleaned up abdomen. And let's go into the thorax and do the same thing, and select just that little red part and delete it. So by using the drawing mode, you can go in and clean up any of the things you've already created in the camera view. You can draw in either camera view or drawing view, but you'll probably want to use the drawing view if you want to get a little more detailed. Another tool that can help you when you're working on creating your characters is the light table. Now, this is a little different than onion skin. The light table is going to allow you to see what's happening on other layers when you're working on a different layer. Now, there's a light table mode for when you're working in camera view, as well as when you're working in drawing view. I just want to quickly show you what the differences are and how to work with those. We've created our thorax and our abdomen. We still have our legs to work with. So what I want to do is go ahead and grab my paintbrush. Now I'm currently in the camera view. So I want to go to the back legs, for instance. And if I try to work on these, it's a little confusing to figure out which legs I want to work on. So I'm going to come over here to the corner, and I'm going to turn on my light table. And instantly, everything else is actually faded out except for the back legs layer. So now I know I can just simply work on my legs here. And I'll go ahead and grab my select tool, select by color, and let's get rid of the red legs. I'll simply press delete. And so I've got those back legs done. And to do the front legs, I'm going to show you how the light table works in drawing mode. So go to my layer, legs front, go to the drawing mode, click here. So I'm in the drawing mode, but I can't see what's going on with my other layers. So in order to do this, I'll simply go up top and show the light table. So now I can see what's going on with my front legs. So I can just come in and start drawing out how I'd like those to be. And we'll just select this and clean it up a little bit. Option Shift S and cleaned up our line. So that is how you can work with the light table. And it helps out a lot as long as you remember the differences, whether you're working in the camera view or the drawing view, how you can see your other layers just by turning that option on. In the drawing view, not only can you work and refine the drawings that you've created, but you can also use the onion skin. To show you an example of this, I'm going to draw out a series of circles that are going to be expanded over a series of frames. So I'm now in my drawing view, and I'm going to add a drawing layer, and I'll just call it circles. Add and close. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my light table so I don't see our character Earl. I'm just going to grab my paintbrush, and I'm going to draw out a simple circle. Now I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut and use my less than and greater than keys to move forward on my frames. Move forward to frame 2, so I can't see anything right now. Simply turn on my onion skin. So I come down to the base here and show onion skin. So now I can draw another circle. And again, I'm just using my keyboard shortcuts of less than and greater than to move backward and forward. So to go forward 1, and I'm just going to keep moving forward and just draw a series of circles here. All right, now that's enough. We can adjust how many frames we're actually going to see just by going to the top here. So by clicking the Add One Onion Skin button, I can click to see more and more previous drawings. And if you look right down at the timeline, our little guides here are being adjusted. And if I move my playhead back, we see multiple previous frames. Our current frame is in black, but we only see one next frame. So in order to adjust this, we'll go to our Add One of the next drawing, and we can see the other two drawings now have been added. Now these controls aren't exclusive to the drawing view. They're also in the camera view. So if I go to camera view, they're right up here at the top. And if you recall, another way of doing this is also adjusting your onion skin manually by moving the guides on the timeline. A big help when you're animating or even creating your characters is having a grid or a guide to follow. Now, if you're familiar with traditional animation, these are referred to as field guides. So what I want to show you is how you can work with these in your camera view as well as your drawing view and how you can adjust them. So right now we're in the camera view. I'm going to go up to my left-hand side here, and I want to click Show Grid. So at this point, I can see Field Guide here. Now, because I have the front wing selected, if you notice, the front wing, and only the front wing, is in front of the grid. Now we can adjust this by going to View, come down to Grid, and we can have Underlay or Overlay. So I'll switch to Overlay, and now the grid is in front of everything. Go back and switch this back to normal, make that Underlay. Another option I have is what size of grid I want to show. So we'll go to View, come down to Grid, and we can use a square grid, or what the default is, a 12-field grid. or even switch it to a 16-field grid. Now, your 12-field grid would be used if you have a 4:3 aspect ratio, whereas the 16-field grid is used if you have a 16:9 aspect ratio. Since our current animation is 1920 by 1080, which is a 16:9 aspect ratio, in order to actually have the field guide cover the entire screen, we're going to be using a 16-field guide. Now, this works whether you're in camera view or in the drawing view, and it also works in tandem if you turn on the light table. And once you're done with your guides, you can simply turn them off by toggling the Show Grid button. So, using grids and guides is not only a good way to keep everything lined up if you're working on your own, but if you're working with a team of animators, you can talk about different coordinates and different measurements you need to do based on the guides. If there's one thing that might get a little confusing looking at the camera view versus the drawing view, it's the position of your drawings. This is because in the camera view, anything that's been animated, it's going to show it exactly in the position that it has been animated. But the drawing view shows the original position of the drawing when it was created. For an example, I'm going to take my select tool, click on our character's hair, and I'm going to move this just over to the side here. Now, the select tool is part of the drawing tools, so anything we move here in our camera view, if I go to drawing, and I'm going to simply do Shift M to get the full view here, that is exactly where it is in our drawing view. If I decide to move this in our drawing view and go back to camera view, it's exactly where it should be. Now, there are other tools that appear to do the exact same thing as our select tool, but they're not drawing tools, they're animating tools. One of these is our transform tool, and the others would be the advanced animation tools that are right up here at the top. Now, if you don't see your advanced animation tools, simply go to Windows, come down to Toolbars, and select Advanced Animation. So what I want to do is I'm going to select our Translate tool. I'm going to select the hair and click and move this over to the side again. And now, if I go to our drawing view, it's actually still in the original position because this is where it was drawn. So if you go back to the camera view, using the Translate tool, this is showing where it would have been animated. So I want to undo this. Do Command-Z, Control-Z on PC, and let's go back to our Select tool. Another example of this, our wings here are actually clones. We have the front wing, and we also have the back wing. So if I decide to change anything that's going on with the front wing, for instance, let's make this a red outline, it automatically updates on the back wing. Also, if I decide to move one of these wings, it moves both of them at the same time. I'm going to undo that, Command-Z. But if we go to drawing mode, we can only see one of the wings. The reason is these are clones, and the second position was actually done using one of the transform tools. To show you an example, let's go to camera view, and I will go to the transform tool, and this little blue dot is our pivot point. Put this right at the edge here, and I'm going to rotate this wing all the way down. Now again, transform is for animation, so if I go to the drawing view, we still see the wing in the original position. This does take some getting used to, but once you understand any type of position, rotation, or scale that you would like to have permanent, you'll want to do that in your drawing view and make sure the position is done using your select tools or any of the drawing tools. If you're trying to animate something, you'll want to do that using your animate tools. This way, your positions will stay exactly where you need them to be. Though it is possible to create your entire animation or characters using only Toon Boom Harmony tools, you can import from other programs such as Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, and others. What I want to show you now is how you can import Illustrator files. So I'm going to first go up to File, and I'm going to come down to Import. I see Images, Sound, Movie, and at the bottom there's SWF and Illustrator files to Library, but it's grayed out. Now this is by default, and it's not that we need a higher version of software, but we just have to change a few things before we can import Illustrator files. Select the Library tab, and I see two separate folders. One is marked Symbols, and the other is marked Stage Essentials, and you'll see that there's a lock here. I'm going to simply right-click, and what I want to select is Write to Modify. Now the lock has disappeared, and now if I go back to File, Import, we now have SWF as well as Illustrator files to the library. Now that's just the first part. I now want to show you how you would prepare your Adobe Illustrator files. I'm now in Adobe Illustrator, and this is the CC 2014 version. And there are a few things that I have found to be best practices to make sure you can import your files without any problems. I have two different layers here, these little rocks on one layer, and I have this little man-eating plant on another layer. I found it best to actually bring these over in RGB versus CMYK. And if you go to File, you can come down to Document Color Mode and change that here. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this in a lower version. We're going to save it as Creative Suite versus the cloud format. And I want the format to be Adobe Illustrator. I'm going to save over my earlier version. Click Replace. Right at the top is where we have our options. And I want to come down and simply select Illustrator CS. Now, you will get a warning about saving to legacy formats, but I've found that best practices say to save this at a lower version, and it imports into Toon Boom Harmony a lot easier. Click OK. Go back over to Toon Boom Harmony. So we'll now go to File, Import, Illustrator Files to Library. Go to my folder, and I'll grab Plant 3, click Open. And here we have the option that we can even change what the name is, but I'm going to go ahead and leave this as it is as Plant 3, and the extension simply says Template. So we'll click OK. And to use this in my scene, I can drag it either to the camera view or straight to the timeline. I'm just going to click and drag this straight to the timeline and let go of my mouse. And you'll get this little pop-up window, and it's basically asking, is it okay to import the colors we used in Illustrator? Now, I can't think of a reason that you would actually say no, so I generally just go ahead and click yes. So this is bringing in all of our colors, and it's even bringing in the gradient we created. We now have our Illustrator document imported into Toon Boom Harmony, no trouble at all, and the colors have been brought in, and it even preserved our layers. I'm going to click once, so both layers are not selected. And we have our rocks on one layer, our man-eating plant on the other layer. So if you are more comfortable with creating your elements or even your characters in Adobe Illustrator, you can easily bring those into Toon Boom Harmony. Just make sure you save those at a lower version and select in your library Write to Modify, and that will allow you to import Illustrator files with no problem. In addition to importing vector files like Illustrator, Freehand, or even Inkscape, you can also import bitmap files. What I want to show you now is how you can import Photoshop, and in particular, how you can import Photoshop documents and preserve all of the layers. Go over to Photoshop, and this is Photoshop CC 2014, and I'm opening the document cavemanlandscape.psd. I have a document here. It's got several layers. I have the sky, pterodactyl in the background, the sun, all these different layers. And this was illustrated by a friend of mine, Chris Cartledge, and I needed all these elements in different layers to not draw it out flat. I will typically work in a pipeline like this where I'll get rough images, but I always have them set up in layers. I'm going to show you how to bring this in the wrong way and what happens in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. So if I decide to save this document, I'm going to simply do Save As, call this one Wrong, and we'll save this as Photoshop, and we'll click OK. So now I'm going to go to Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, File, Import Images. So I'm going to browse, and I'm going to click the wrong PSD, and I want to click Open. Now, it's asking me, do I want to create layers, as well as do I want to create a single layer named Landscape Wrong? Actually, I want to have layers based on the file names. Bring them in normal. So I'll simply click OK. And it says some of the items you're importing contain multiple layers. Please indicate how you wish these items to be imported. And I definitely want these to be separated layers. I want this to be the default of clamping the color to alpha, which basically means I do want the alpha channel, meaning transparency, but I also want it to stick as close to the colors on the edge of each element as possible. Click OK. So now, when we look at this, we do not have layers. What we do have are frames. So every single layer has been turned into a frame. And this is not what we want. You might be thinking, well, I could work with that. I could just go ahead and separate these. Trust me when I tell you, it doesn't come out well at all. So I'm going to undo this, Command Z, and I want to show you the correct way to import a Photoshop document into Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. So let's go back to Photoshop, and for each layer, I'm going to turn this into a layer group. Select each layer and press Command G on my keyboard, Control G on PC, and I'll go ahead and change the names as well, and I'll do this for each layer. And I want to go ahead and collapse the layers that I've done already. And again, for each one of these layers, I'll simply select it. I'll do Command G, Control G on PC. I'm putting in an underscore instead of doing a space, mainly because I know that's the way that Toon Boom Harmony prefers documents to be written out. Let's do Command G, call this 6. This will be 7, 8, and this will be the sun, the pterodactyl, and last, the sky. All right, save this as the caveman landscape right. Save that in the same folder. And I definitely want to leave on maximize compatibility. And we'll now go back to Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. Go to File, Import Images, and we'll browse, and we'll import the right PSD. We want to create layers and create layer names based on the file names. And again, we're not vectorizing this. Click OK. Yes, we want separated layers, and yes, we want clamp color to alpha. And I'll click OK. Now, if you look, we have all of our different layers set up exactly the way we had them in Photoshop. There is one other thing I do want to show you. If you look, all of this is brought in, but it's brought in much smaller, and it's just fitting into the size of our camera. What I would like to do is show you one last trick. It's the pipeline of how I would bring in a sketch from Photoshop. I would vectorize it mainly to keep the size, and then I would do my cleanup work inside of Toon Boom Harmony. So let's go ahead and undo this last import. Let's do Command Z. Go to File, Import, Images, bring in the same file, create layers, and create layers based on the file name, but I want to vectorize the image. If we were just bringing in a line drawing, then I would use black and white. But because I realize I'm working in blues and yellows and even whites, and I want to keep all of those, I want to go ahead and select color. So I'll click OK, and I do want separated layers and the clamp color, and click OK again. Now this might take a little bit, mainly because we are asking it to vectorize 9 or 10 different layers and place those back into Toon Boom Harmony. That way, when you bring your Photoshop document into Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, all of your layers will be preserved. Another format that you can actually import into Toon Boom Harmony Essentials is the SWF format. Now, if you're not familiar with that format, it's the export that comes out of Flash, and it's referred to as the shockwave format, SWF. Now, in order to import the SWF, you'll need to go to File, come down to Import, and you'll look for SWF and Illustrator files to library. If you do not see this option, or if it is grayed out, you'll need to go to your library and come down to your folders. And for the Stage Essentials, you want to right-click on this and make sure you select Write to Modify. Simply go to File, Import, SWF. I will locate my file, and I'm going to bring in the man-eating plant.swf, and it will bring it over as a template, and I'll click OK. I'm just going to bring my timeline up so you can see what's about to happen. Simply drag this straight into the camera view and let go of my mouse. And it's going to ask, do I want to import the colors? Click Yes. So what we have here are several layers, and all of these have been put together in what's referred to as a peg. That's going to allow us to move this if we need to, but all of our animation has been imported from our SWF. Now I'm going to show you what this looks like in Flash. I'm going to simply scrub my playhead, and we have the exact same animation. We had a white background, which is why there was a white color card added in our Toon Boom Harmony document. There are a couple of things you need to be aware of if you're trying to import anything from Adobe Flash over into Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. In Adobe Flash, you want to make sure you're using graphic symbols and you're not doing any animation that's script-based. Everything should be timeline-based. If you follow those rules, you should be okay. And you'll be able to import your Flash SWF into Toon Boom Harmony with few issues. One important feature to almost any animation is sound. Now, that includes not only voices for your characters, but it can also include sound effects or background music. Importing sound in Harmony is actually pretty simple, but I do want to show you a couple of things you need to be aware of. For one, you'll want to import a WAV file, an MP3, or a .aif file. So what I want to simply do is go to File, Import, and come down and select Sound. Now, once I have this, I'm going to go to my import folder. I'm going to bring in the sound Jungle Morning, and I can bring that in as a AIF or a WAV file. Now I'm going to bring in an AIF, just simply click Open. And once I've done that, it actually shows up on my timeline. Now, a couple of things you need to be aware of. Our original document is only 60 frames long. However, our sound is much longer than that. I'm going to simply double-click on the sound icon here on our timeline, and it's going to show me what's happening on the timeline. I'm going to move the playhead all the way toward the end until I see where the sound stops. I can also use the base here to get there a little bit quicker. So this sound is actually about a minute and some seconds long, so this needs to be extended out to frame 1507. So once I know that, I can now close, and I want to change my animation length. I'll simply go to Scene, Scene Length, and I will type in 1507, and click OK. I see that my new animation length is the entire length of the sound. In addition to this, in order to actually hear the sound in Toon Boom Harmony, you're going to need to change a few things on your timeline. Scrub all the way back to the beginning here. And if I scrub the playhead, there's no sound right now. In order to hear that, you would need to, 1, turn on scrubbing, which is the speaker with the S icon, and 2, you would have to turn on sound. Once that is done, you can play your sound back with no problem. So I have a background sound in, and if I were going to import anything else, I would just have that on a different sound layer, and at the end, I would group all of these into their own folder. So when it comes to sound, remember, you'll want to import a .aif, .wave, or an MP3 file. And make sure your sound and scrubbing icons are both turned on. In addition to importing SWFs, vectors, and bitmaps, you can also import video. Now this comes in handy whether you just need to import something for reference, or you might be importing video just to add animation to that video. To do this, go to File, come down to Import, and select Movie. So I'll go find my file. I'm going to bring in cavemanhair.mov. You can bring in a .mov, a .mp4, or a .avi. I'm going to simply click Open. Now it's actually imported the video. Now a few things you need to be aware of. What Toon Boom Harmony has actually done, it's converted the video to single frames. So now I can come in and select how I want these layers to be displayed. I do want this to be a single layer, and it's offering me to vectorize the image. Now the vectorization will help because this is a little bit CPU intensive. I'm just going to go ahead and leave this all as a default and simply click OK. Now we have our sound layer as well as each of the images. Now, when you think about importing video, a couple things you want to keep in mind. You don't want things to be too long. I would suggest keeping any movie you're trying to import into Toon Boom Harmony under 2 minutes. So once your elements are imported, you can use them as reference or add animation on top of those using different layers. And you can even go in and export smaller sections of the movies when needed. So remember, when you're importing movies, you want to keep the length of the movie pretty low, as well as select the vectorization process, because importing video can be a little bit intensive on your computer. There are several ways you can animate in Harmony. One of those is a more traditional way where you can draw frame to frame and give the illusion of movement just by your drawings. A second way is a more digital or even flash approach where you're letting the computer do any of the interpolation between 2 key drawings. And a third way is to combine those 2 actions where you're drawing some of the elements out by hand, but you're also using the computer to do some of the in-between animation for you. So I'm going to demonstrate a couple of those things for you, as well as show you the buttons and different systems you're going to need to get used to when animating in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. Now, when you first open Toon Boom Harmony Essentials, one of the things you'll notice is this little icon with this running man, and this is your Animate button. Now, when you're creating your different drawings, you almost always want to make sure this button is turned off. And we're going to turn this back on later. Simply draw out a basic circle going from one side of the screen to the other. Grab my brush tool, and I'm going to draw out a basic circle. In traditional animation, this would be our keyframe. And I'm going to go ahead and select frame 5. And I'm going to turn on my onion skin and make sure I can see the previous frame. So I'm going to click and adjust my onion skin. And I want frame 5, I want the little circle to be on the other side of the screen here. In traditional animation, we'd have a keyframe in the beginning, and we have a keyframe at frame 5. What I now want to do is refer to as the breakdown. What would be the in-between of these frames? Select frame 3. And I'll just draw a basic breakdown and just make it right in the center. And next, I'll select frame 2. And this is going to be what is between frame 1 and frame 3. And next, I'll select frame 4 for what is between frames 3 and 5. So I'm going to turn off my onion skin for a moment. And if I scrub the playhead, we have a simple animation of a circle going left to right. Now, this is a more traditional style of animation where you'd be drawing out each frame. What I want to show you next is a more digital style animation, and if you're familiar with working with programs such as Flash or even Toon Boom Studio, you may be more used to the style of animation where the computer is going to interpolate the frames for you. So I'm going to add a new drawing layer, and I'll just call this digital. Click Add and Close, and I want to use a different color so we can see the difference here. So I'm going to draw out a simple little circle. Now for this animation, we're only going to draw one circle, but we're going to have the computer help us move it from one side of the screen to the other. Now in order to do that, I'm going to come back down to our animate button and I want to turn this on. I'm also going to introduce you to a couple of shortcut keys specifically for animation. And if you're familiar with working with Flash, these are similar to what you'll be doing in Flash to actually do any type of keyframes or animation. So for the very first frame, I'll select frame 1, and I want to insert a keyframe, so I'll simply press F6. And if you notice, there's a simple little square right on our first frame. That square represents a keyframe. Now I want to select frame 5 on our digital layer, and I want to extend this exposure, so I'll simply press F5 to extend the exposure. Because our animate button is turned on, the only thing we'll need to do is simply move this red circle all the way to the other side of the screen. In order to do that, I'm going to simply come down and select our transform button, and I'm going to click and move the circle to the other side of the screen. Now if you look down here on our timeline, there's this little line, and that's basically Harmony letting us know that the in-betweens have been created for us by the program. So if I scrub my playhead, we see the animation going just the same as we did if we drew that out frame by frame. So those are some of the basics of working in Toon Boom Harmony, and we're going to be using both of these types of animation throughout the project. With respect to 2D digital animation, one key element is the ability to set your pivot points. Now when you think of a pivot point, imagine a piece of paper and you have a simple thumbtack. Wherever you're going to place that thumbtack, it's going to pretty much center where that piece of paper will be able to spin from. So if you put the thumbtack in the center of the paper, it will spin based on the center. Now if you put it on the corner of the paper, it can spin based on the corner. There are a couple places you can adjust your pivot point in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials. One of those is a temporary setting, and that's using a transform tool. And the other is a more permanent setting, and that is using your advanced animation rotate tool. So I want to show you this using our little circle example here. And we already have an animation where it's going from one side of the screen to the other. But what I want to do now, I want to make sure my animate button is turned on, and I have my transform tool selected. And I'm going to come up here and just click and drag to select our red circle. And if you notice, we have this little dot right here. This is our pivot point. If I wanted to rotate the circle, I'm going to simply move my cursor close to the edge until I see the icon change. I'll click to rotate it, but there's a problem. It's rotating like a giant orbit here. Undo that, Command Z. Now, the reason that it's doing that, it's because anytime you draw something in Harmony Essentials, the item is going to have a pivot point of being dead center. Now, we can change that by simply going to our pivot point. I'm going to move down here, and you'll even notice the cursor changes as soon as it's right on the pivot point. I can click and drag the pivot point right to the center of our circle. Now, if you look, you still see a faded out little version of where the pivot point was initially. That's because using the transform tool to move our pivot point is only temporary. But even though it's temporary, I can still go here and rotate our circle. So because our animate button is turned on, if I decide to scrub this now, and this looks a little bit off, and I'm going to zoom out just to show you what's going on. So even though we've changed our pivot point, the animation is still acting as if the pivot point is dead center. Now, let's show you how to change this permanently. I want to use my advanced animation tools, and they're right at the top of my screen here. And if you don't see these, simply go to Windows, come down to Toolbars, and select Advanced Animation. So out of these, I want to select my Rotate tool, and I'll come down to the icon here. And again, I see the pivot point. I'm going to click and drag this so it's at the very center of my circle. So now if I scrub my playhead, moving a little bit better, and it's even spinning around. I'm going to zoom in so you can see what's going on. I'm going to hold on my spacebar just to get the hand tool temporarily. So now I'll go back to my transform tool. Notice, if I'm using the rotate tool or any of the advanced animation tools, the transform tool automatically becomes deselected. In the same way, if I now select the transform tool, the rotate tool is no longer selected. So for my final frame here, I'm just going to move the circle right above where it was initially. And you can see the circle spinning around. Now, setting your pivot points isn't just for a circular item, of course. If I decide to add another layer here, and we'll call this line, and click Add and Close, I'm going to take my brush tool and draw a simple little line. And to set my pivot point, I'll go to my Rotate tool. I'm going to click and drag this so it's right here at the base. Now I'm going to go ahead and extend the exposure of my line. I'll select frame 5 on the line layer. Press F5 to extend the exposure. Now I'll select frame 1, and I want to insert a keyframe, F6, and I'll select frame 5. I can use either the Rotate tool or even the Transform tool to make this line just fall over as if it's a stick. I'm going to go ahead and grab my transform tool and rotate the line straight down, and there you have it. So it's a good practice to set your pivot points whenever you're setting up your drawings, especially if you're doing a more 2D digital style of animation versus traditional hand-drawn animation. One element that will really help bring life to any animation is easing. Nothing in nature or in life is going to move at the exact same pace. Think of a car. A car doesn't instantly start at 25 or 50 miles per hour. It gradually has to get up to that point. And when that car stops, it doesn't instantly stop. It would gradually have to get to a stopping point. So for a car to accelerate, you'll see it go from a standing still point and gradually get up to its speed. With respect to easing, that would be called easing in. And if a car is stopping, it would gradually get to its stopping point, or easing out. Now, of course, you can draw this out by hand, but in digital animation, you can also have Harmony help you set those easing points. So what I have here is a simple little red circle, and I'm going to have this go from one side of the screen to the other, and we're going to do this over 60 frames. To do this, we're going to be using some of Toon Boom's easing presets. So I'm using the easing document here. I want to insert a keyframe. I'll simply press F6. And I want to make sure my animate button is turned on. I'm going to extend the exposure out to frame 60. I'll simply press F5. And in my camera view, I'll simply click on the circle and move this to the other side of the screen. Now, if I play my animation, it simply goes from one side of the screen to the other. Now, to show a representation of each one of those frames, what I'm going to do is turn on my control. So I'll go up to the top of my screen, and you'll see these little lines here. I'm going to click on the orange one to show control. What I see is a representation of each frame across these 60 frames, these little lines here. Now, again, this is a visual representation, and it's really going to help to show exactly how easing works. Now, what I'd like to do is an ease in, where the little ball is very slow at the beginning and then it speeds up. So I'm going to select frame 1, and I'll go to my easing presets, and I'll click here just once, and by default, this straight line means that there's no easing set at all, so everything is evenly spaced. What I'd like to do is have it very slow at the beginning and then have it speed up. Select the third little icon, and if you notice, the arc is a little closer to the bottom at the beginning. That basically means it's going to be slower at the beginning, and it ramps up pretty quickly. So I'll select this ease type, and if you note, those little control lines, you see a lot more frames at the beginning than toward the end. So if I play the animation now, so now that we've shown you how to do an ease in, let's do an ease out. So I'll select frame 1 again, and I'll go to the ease type, and I'm going to come closer to the bottom. You'll note that the control is different. The frames are spaced further at the beginning, and toward the end they slow down, and they're closer together. So if I play this, and there are other presets you can take a look at. For instance, we can have one slow at the beginning and slow at the end, and it speeds up in the middle. So if we play this, I'm going to turn on my loop just so you can see this a few times. So by adding easing, you're going to be able to give another layer of life to an otherwise stagnant piece of animation. In animation, from time to time, you're going to need to keep something repeating over and over. Now this is true in 3D animation, 2D animation, traditional or digital animation. This is simply referred to as creating a cycle. Now, a cycle can be something as simple as creating a live line effect or a line boil by drawing the line over and over, or something as complex as doing a walk cycle. Now what I'm going to do here is show you how we can create a live line or a line boil with our mosquito character. And I've drawn out some of the frames already, but to show you what I've done, I'm going to take you step by step in drawing the rest of the hair. So if we take a look at our timeline, on our Skeeter layer, I have 3 different drawing substitutions. There's drawing 1, there's drawing 2, and drawing 3. And the only thing I've done is turned on my onion skin and just redrawn the exact lines over and over. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I'll finish this up because I haven't drawn the hair on the other frames. So I'll select frame 2, and I'll get my paintbrush, and I'm going to hold down Command and Option, Control Alt on PC, and rotate my screen a little bit. And I'll draw out the hair, and I'm basically tracing what's there. And I'll go to the next frame and draw this out again. Now, once we create a cycle out of this, it's going to give a live line or a line boil to our animation. So I'll simply reset my view. Let's do Shift M. And if I scrub my playhead back and forth, you can kind of see what's happening there. Now I'm going to turn off my onion skin. And what I want to do is simply create a cycle. So I'm going to select all three of the drawings, hold on my Shift key, and select drawing 3, and that'll select all 3 drawings. And I want to right click, go up to Create Cycle. Now our default animation length is 60 frames, and we just have 3 drawings. I want this to repeat 20 times, as in 3 times 20 equals 60 frames. Click OK. And if you look, we now have those drawings repeated over and over in a cycle. So if I click play, we have a line boil or a live line type character. Now, if you take a little more time in drawing it, it has a really nice traditional animation feel to it. If we think that's moving a little bit too fast, we can undo that, Command Z, and instead of just 3 drawings, we can set each drawing to an exposure of 2. So I'll right click, go to exposure, set exposure to 2, and this basically means each drawing is shown twice. So we now have 6 frames. So I'll select drawing 1, hold on my Shift key, select drawing 6, right click, create a cycle, and this time instead of 20, we just need 10 because we have 6 frames. 6 times 10, 60 frames. And now if we play our animation, so creating a cycle in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials is pretty simple to do. Just keep a few things in mind. How many drawings you have, how many exposures you're going to need for each drawing, and last but not least, how long you want that cycle to run. If you have a background in working in Adobe Flash as far as animation, you may be used to using symbols. Now, when it comes to Toon Boom Harmony in general, you really don't have to use symbols. The reason is the drawings that are in Toon Boom Harmony are much more powerful than, say, a graphic symbol in Flash. So you don't have to save out any type of symbol in order to do an animation. However, there are some exceptions as to why you would have to use a symbol, and one of those is to do any type of animation cycle where you're using tweens. Now in my example here, I have our mosquito character. We have 2 different layers for the back wing and the front wing. And I've set up a simple little animation. And what I want to do is to create a cycle for the wings to match the cycle we have going for our line boil. I'm going to go ahead and make sure this is taking up only 6 frames for our little wing animation. I'll select all 6 of the frames on the back wing, and I'll simply right click, and I'll go to create a cycle. Now this isn't going to work. I'll tell you why in a moment. So we're going to need 10 cycles, and we'll click OK. So we have our animation in the beginning, and then the wing just stays in one space. That's not actually what we're looking for. So let's simply do Command Z and undo that. Now, in order to create a cycle where I have different elements or different drawings that are tweened, I'm going to have to create a symbol. Now to do this, I'll simply go over and make my library visible, and I want to make sure all of my drawings are selected on my back wing, and I'll click and drag this straight to the library. So we have wing B, and while we're at it, I'll go ahead and do the front wing as well. So I'll select all 6 of the frames for the front wing, hold on my Shift key, select frame 6, and I'll click and drag the frames to the library. Now by dragging them to the library, I've automatically created symbols. To use these symbols in my animation, I'm going to simply come down to the back wing. I'll select these 6 frames and delete them off of the main timeline. I'll select my back wing symbol, drag it down to my timeline, and before I let go, I'm going to hold down my control button, let go of the mouse, and I'll get a paste special option. Now the only thing I'll need to do here is select the box that says paste all frames, and I'll click OK. And so we have all of the symbol there, and we'll do the same thing with our front wing. I'll select all 6 frames. I'll delete those, grab the front wing symbol, drag it down to the timeline, hold on to my control key, let go of the mouse, and select paste all frames of the symbol, and click OK. So now we have our animation just as we did before, but we don't see any tweens. And because of this, we can now select all 6 frames, right click, and create a cycle. Make this 10, click OK. And we'll do the same for our back wing animation, and create a cycle, click OK. So now we have our animation. And if we want to edit any of these symbols, we simply go to our library, right click, come down to Edit Symbol, and I can come here and change anything with my initial drawing. We can do the same thing with the back wing, Edit Symbol. And to get back to our initial animation, we'll simply go and select Top. And the drawings in our initial animation have been updated because we edited the symbol. So if I click play, so it is possible to create an entire animation without using a symbol. However, there are times that you are going to need to use a symbol, and in order to do that, you'll just simply create the animation on your main timeline, add it to your library, and then you can edit the drawings inside of the symbol. Now that we have the basics down about Harmony Essentials, let's talk character design. Now, when it comes to character design, we have to discuss things of archetypes, or even body shapes and different styles. For instance, some characters are tall and skinny, which have one personality. Some characters are more large and bulky, which usually carry another personality. Another thing is the character going to animate well? Are you going to use a cutout style of animation or full animation? And there are also budget and time constraints to be concerned with. What style are you using? For example, in the early 90s, cartoons typically had a very thick line. So if I take my line tool, and let's go ahead and select the color black, and I'm going to increase the line just a little bit in size here. In the early 90s, the lines for our character, let's say if we did anything with the hair here, it would be not only a thicker line, but in addition to that, there would be very simple lines. So Koi's hair, for example, instead of it having a lot of extra lines here, it would just be one simple line. It would go from one point to another. So the hair would be a lot more simpler and the lines would be much thicker. In contrast, in the 2000s, the lines got a lot thinner. So let's take a look here. And in today's cartoons, the lines are probably around a 2 or a 3 as far as width, and they're a lot more detailed. They're a lot closer to a pencil line as far as the style. So I'm going to go ahead and undo both of these, Command Z, Control Z on PC, and we'll zoom out. So with respect to our character Koi here, this is an illustration that was given to us, and so we're going to make a few changes just to make sure that the style lines up with what we're doing, as well as we're going to make sure it can animate well. So let's go ahead and grab our brush tool. Let's go to our colors. I'm going to use my sketch blue color. I also want to go ahead and add in a color card, and that way we can actually draw outside of the original bitmap. All right, so I'll go to my drawing layer. Let's zoom in here. Now, there are a few things we want to do. One, I want to have the eye look a little bit different, a different style. So I'm going to go ahead and draw out the different eye style that I want. And these are going to be large, bulging eyes here. And also changing the nose. So instead of the eyebrow being there, we're going to make the eyelids there. And just draw this out just a little bit. And the eyebrows would be much higher. Instead of having a bottom eyelid, I'm just going to give him a large bag under his eye. And that is how we're going to change the look of the eyes. Now, in addition to this, we're going to take a look at the feet of our character, particularly the legs. I'm going to hold on my spacebar to get the move tool here. Now, the reason I want to take a look at this is the legs, it's a cute design. It's going to be a little more complicated to do a walk cycle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply just kind of trace out the feet that are already here. And now I'm going to select, I'm just going to hold on my command key real quick and select that little drawing I did and move this down a bit and redraw the legs. And this way, it's going to make sense. You can kind of see a little sketch of where the body would be. And this way, we can go ahead and divide this up into two parts. So we have the thigh and the calf. Last but not least, we would have the foot. And of course, if our leg is this long, we would make our little club just as long here, just to work with the drawing a little more. Now, the reason we extended the legs, it's going to make it a lot easier to do a walk cycle. And with the eyes, we wanted to have them a little more cartoony or a little more expressive than the original illustration. With character design, remember, it's more than just making your character look cool. It's designing it for the animation you're working on. There are two basic types of 2D animation. One is hand-drawn or full animation, and the other is cutout animation. Now, the type of animation we're doing for this project is cutout animation, and more specifically, what we're doing is a type of animation called hinged animation. This is basically where we separate each of the limbs onto different layers as if they're a puppet. Think of those paper skeletons that are used for Halloween decorations. Each limb is a separate part, and they're all connected by different grommets. So we're going to do the same here with our character Koi. So I want to go ahead and grab my selection tool and make sure I'm using the lasso. And the first thing I want to do is grab these first few pieces that I've already drawn out in our previous lesson. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab the foot here. And now that I have that selected, I'm going to simply cut, Command X, Control X on PC. And I'll add a new drawing layer. And I'm going to label this F-foot. Now, this basically stands for front foot. We'll be creating the back foot later, but for right now, we're just doing all of the front pieces. And I'll go ahead and paste, Command V, Control V on PC. Now, in addition to this, what I'm going to do is give myself a little reminder of where I'm going to set my pivot point later. So I'll grab my paintbrush, and we'll grab the color red, and I'm just going to make a little X right where I would want that pivot point to be. And the next thing I do, I'll go back to my drawing layer, get my select tool, and now I need to grab the calf, and we'll cut this, Command X, add a new drawing layer. And this will be our front calf. And go ahead and paste. And let's get back to our paintbrush. And I'm going to, again, indicate where I want to have my pivot points. And I'll make sure I add in the rest of the calf here. And just to see what I'm doing, I'm going to come over and turn on my light table. And so I can see what's happening just on this layer. And I'm going to go ahead and add in another layer here. And this will be the thigh. Now, instead of cutting and pasting, this time I'm just going to go ahead and use what is drawn on another layer here. And I'll just sketch this out. Grab my red, and I know where my pivot point is. And the next thing I want to do is I want to work on the arm. So it would be the upper arm, lower arm, and then the hand. So I'll select my top layer here. And what I want to do now is I'm going to add several layers at once. So I'll click Add Drawing Layer. And so we'll say Front Hand. Click Add. And we'll say Front Forearm. Now I'm calling this forearm, but you can also call it lower arm. And so we'll click Add. And we'll do Front Bicep. And we'll do Add and Close. Now if you look at our layers, we already have these set up. So I'm going to select the hand layer. And I'm just going to rough in where the hand is. Let's get back to my sketch blue. Not doing any details just yet. I just want to show where the hand would be. And a pivot point. Forearm. And pivot point. And the bicep. Go back to our sketch blue. And I'm just, again, marking in where my pivot point would be. And of course, the next thing we'll need is our torso. So we'll click Add and Close. Now, the torso is part of the loincloth and everything, so we'll grab our sketch blue here. And if you look, I'm kind of drawing through where the arm is because we have to actually have the full body here. And we'll draw where the hole in the loincloth would be. And last but not least, we'll take a look at the head. Now, for the head, we'll need a layer for the mouth. We'll also need a layer for the eyes, and we'll actually need a separate layer for the head. So let's go ahead and do 3 different parts here. So we'll type in head. So we'll add, then we'll type in a layer for eyes, and we'll type in a layer for mouth. Now I am writing this out as plural because we're going to have to add in more than one mouth later. So we'll click Add and Close. Now for the head, we'll just go ahead and rough this out a little bit. Now this might look a little weird, mainly because we're not really adding in anything like the eyes or the mouth. This is just going to be where the head is. So we'll select a new layer for the eyes and another layer for the mouths. Now the mouths I'm going to draw out a little bit into the other part of the head here. So everything is overlapping. I'm going to add one more layer for the nose here. And one you might not think about is the neck. So add and close, and I'll just draw in the neck. When it comes to working on a hinged character, remember, anything you're going to want to move or animate later has to be on its own separate layer. And we'll be able to use this puppet in a lot more combinations without having to redraw everything. Now that we have our character divided into different layers, it's time to start working on inking. Now previously we've been using the paintbrush tool to get a lot of our drawings done, but for the inking, my preference is to use either the pencil or the line tool. So to start this off, I'm going to go ahead and grab our line tool, and I'm going to add a new layer here just to show you the inking technique that I use. And I'm going to go ahead and ink the back hand. So I'll click Add and Close, and I'll select this layer. I'm going to zoom in here. And for the width of the stroke I want to use, I'm going to select pencil number 2, which is giving a 10 line width. Now this also plays into the character design of the animation that you're doing. For instance, in 1990s cartoons, the line weight was very, very thick, whereas 2000s cartoons, the line weight is very thin. By using a number 10 weight, we're actually kind of going in the middle here. So to show you this, I'm going to go ahead and click. I'm going to drag out our line. I'm going to simply hold down my Command key, and that's Control on PC, and curve our line. And now I'll draw out the rest of the thumb here. Curve the line. So drawing a straight line, hold down my Command key, curve. This next one I'll break up into 2 pieces. Now, this looks a little bit ragged. I'm going to go ahead and press my K key so I can see the outlines. Each time you see one of these little yellow squares, it's letting us know that there is a gap in the lines that we're creating. Now, the blue lines represent the path, and the yellow squares represent the anchor point. And if we've done a really clean job of this, you would not see as many open holes or anchor points on the screen. So I'm going to show you a trick on how to avoid these. I'm going to simply do Command Z and we'll undo these last drawings here. And that's Control Z on PC. So what I'm going to do now is go to my options on the line tool and I'm going to select Snap to Contour. So I'm going to first draw this line out, hold down my Command key, and I'll curve the line as before. Get right close to the end here and draw out the next line, hold down my Command key, and again that's Control on PC. And let's just kind of do this in two parts. Now if you look, this line is a lot cleaner and there's no open gaps. So do the same here on the other part of the finger. And let's do the hand, base of the hand, the palm, and we'll also do the club. Zoom out. There we have our initial strokes already set up. And I'll go ahead and press my K key once more. Now the next step I want to do is I want to convert these lines into brush strokes. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and solo my layer for a moment. And I'll grab my select tool and we'll grab all of the lines that we've drawn. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit. And I can either go to Drawing, come down to Convert, and select Pencil Lines to Brush Strokes, or I can simply use the shortcut key, which is the ampersand, which would be Shift and the number 7. Now if you look, we've converted pencil lines to brush strokes. It makes it a lot easier once we get to the point of filling in and painting our character. Turn off the solo mode. And to show you another way of actually working on this, we'll look at things like the hair. So for the hair, instead of using the line tool, I'd probably use the pencil tool. And again, I'm making sure this is set to 10. And let's go to our correct layer, go to our head layer. I'm going to turn on my light table so we can see the head a little clearer. So what I would be doing is drawing out the lines here. And because I have my smoothing set to 20, it is actually correcting a lot of what I'd be drawing out. Now it's also possible to use the line tool here. I'd simply grab the line tool and draw out the lines that we needed. Hold on my Command key and curve where things were needed. And I'm going to overlap here just to show one additional technique. I'm going to now go to my cutter tool right under Select. Make sure that I have the lasso and my gestures are turned on. I can come here and simply cut away any extra lines that I don't need. So whether you're using the pencil tool or the line tool, or even a combination of the two, you can go in and have a really crisp, solid, clean line to your character. The type of rigging we're going to be doing for our character Koi is referred to as hinged rigging or nested rigging. And it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. It works on a parent-child hierarchy, and we're going to start with doing the arms. I'm going to move up my timeline a bit so I can see a little bit better. Now, pretty much we are dividing these into front and back. So we have the front bicep, the front forearm, and the front hand. Now, we haven't created the back because we're pretty much going to duplicate the arm once we have it set up. The only difference will be the hands. So what I want to do is select the front bicep on our timeline. And just to show you what exactly I'm doing, I'm going to go ahead and solo the front bicep. So you only see that part. I'm also going to show the forearm and the front hand. So what I want to do on my timeline, I'm going to select the front forearm and I'm going to click this and I'm going to move it over and push it right under the front bicep. Now if you notice there's this little line here and that lets me know that I can parent this layer to the front bicep. Once I let go, we now see this is kind of stair-stepped here. So we have the front bicep and then the front forearm. The next thing I want to do is parent the hand to the forearm. So I'll select the front hand. I'm going to push this under the front forearm. Now if you note, there's two different lines now. There's parenting it to the front bicep. And if I move it over just a little bit more, it's parented to the front forearm. Now that we have these parented, the next thing we have to do, and this is very important, we have to set our pivot point. Now when we are inking our different parts, I did go in and just draw in a temporary mark of where I'd want the pivot points to be. So I'll select the front bicep. Now go to my advanced animation tools and I'll select rotate. And I'm going to move our pivot point right to where it should be for the bicep. I'll set that right at the shoulder area. I'll next select the front forearm. We'll move this right about to the elbow. And then for the hand, move this right down here at the wrist. Now what we can do is simply select our transform tool and we can rotate the hand here. And a shortcut key to move up the hierarchy, I can simply press the letter B as in Bob. And now I can move the forearm as well as the hand. Press B again, and I can move the entire arm. To move down the hierarchy, I'll simply press Shift and the letter B, and Shift B again, and I can control the hand. Now that we have the front arm done, I am going to duplicate this and create the back arm. So I'll simply collapse our hierarchy here, and I'll right-click, and I want to duplicate the selected layers. Not clone, but I want to duplicate the selected layers. And so now, instead of calling this front bicep 1, I'm going to add a B and make this for the back bicep. I'm going to expand this so we can see each of the pieces. And I'm changing the name on each one of these. Now, for the hand, I'm going to do something a little different. For now, I'm going to go ahead and delete this layer. So I'll simply come up here and select Delete Layer. And I'm using the document Rigging Arms. And here, I've already created a back hand. So I'm going to turn on the visibility of this hand here. And we have several different drawings of the hands here for the back hand. And I'm going to bring this all the way down, place this directly under the back forearm. Now, to make sure I can see exactly what I'm doing, we're going to turn off the visibility of our front arm. What we'll do now is I'm going to move our back arm right into position. And I'll go in and set the pivot point using my rotate tool. Okay, so now if I go to transform, I have the hand exactly where I want it to be. And we can still move up and down the hierarchy. So I'll simply press B, and I'll press B once more. So I'm going to rotate the arm a bit. Let's do Shift B, move down. I'm just going to get this in a different position so we can see the difference between the two arms. And we'll do Shift B once more, just to get the hand. And I'll pull up a different hand here. Just going to use my bracket keys, and that hand looks like it'll work. We'll adjust this a little bit. So I'll collapse my back arm. Let's turn off our solo mode. I'm going to zoom out here. And just to see what's going on a little bit more, I'm going to turn off our caveman sketch. And we'll do one last adjustment here. We're going to move our back arm off just a little bit toward the back. So now we set up our front arm as well as our back arm. So by setting our drawings on different layers, we were able to go in and set up a parent-child hierarchy and build a hinged animation. And the beauty of this is, once you've created one side of things, for instance, the arm, you can easily go in and duplicate it and create a second arm. To rig the legs, we're going to work in the same method we did with rigging the arms. We'll go ahead and create the front leg hierarchy and then simply duplicate that and swap out the feet, as you can't have two left feet or two front feet. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to bring up my timeline so I can see it a little bit clearer. I have already drawn out a back foot. I'm going to solo this so you can see exactly what's happening. And we have the front foot, front thigh, and the front calf. So I'm going to turn off the back foot for right now. So this is going to be the first leg we're going to create. So I'm looking down here and noticing that they're not necessarily in order, which is not a big deal. But what I'd like to do first is I'm going to go ahead and parent the calf to the thigh. So select the calf. I'm going to move this directly under the thigh. And I'll select the front foot. And I'll make sure this is parented to the calf. Now again, there's two different lines. The first line would be parenting it to the thigh. The second line is what I want, to parent the foot to the calf. So we have the thigh, the calf, and the foot. And the next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and set up our pivot points. So I'll first go with the thigh, go to my advanced animation tools, select rotate. And if you don't see the advanced animation tools, go to Windows, Toolbars, Advanced Animation. So I'm going to hold on my spacebar to get the hand tool for a moment here, just so I can move down the screen a bit. So I'll place our pivot point right here on the thigh. Let's go to the calf. And the pivot point will be right about at the knee. Now some of these I'm looking at and thinking, okay, I can adjust these a little. And let's go to the foot. This will be right about at the ankle. Now what I want to do is I'll select the thigh. And let's go to our transform tool. And we'll just take a look and see if everything's working out okay. And to move down the hierarchy, I'll do Shift B. I'm seeing how that looks. And this is where you can start making a few adjustments. For instance, I'm going to bring down the knee a little bit. And do Shift B once more. And this way we can take a look at the foot to make sure we have the pivot point set up right. That's not too bad. Now we'll go ahead and collapse our front leg. And what I want to do is go ahead and right click here and we'll duplicate this layer. And I'm going to turn off the visibility of our front leg. And now we're going to go in and change the names of our back leg. Instead of F thigh, we'll make this B thigh. Let's get rid of that _1. Now the reason there's an _1 is you cannot have two layers named the exact same thing. So I'm just going in here, making each one of these the correct name. And actually, the foot, we can go ahead and delete this layer because we're going to bring down the back foot. So I'll simply select delete layer and I'll solo on the back foot, and let's drag this down and parent it to the back calf. And I'm going to bring down my leg here, just moving the scene with my hand tool, just holding down my spacebar. And I'll get the rotate tool and adjust my pivot point. Get about right down to the ankle. And let's go back to our transform tool and we'll see how that looks. Not too bad. We'll maybe move this one back a little bit. Just using my arrow keys on the keyboard. And we know that the leg works because we duplicated it from the initial leg we created. So I'll go ahead and collapse that. And let's just do a little bit of work here. We're going to move this leg out a bit so it looks a little different. Let's do Shift B to move down the hierarchy. Bend our leg. And Shift B again. And rotate our foot up. And let's turn off our solo mode. And so now we have our front leg and back leg, as well as our front arm and back arm. Now, one thing to remember is when you're actually working on setting up your hierarchy, none of this is written in stone. You can always go in and adjust things if you need to, as well as you can even adjust the pivot points during an animation by moving those around. The important part is to make sure you're doing your rigging and making sure that your animate button is not on. That way, any of the adjustments you're doing aren't setting up keyframes. Before we do any more rigging, one of the things we're going to do is go ahead and start setting up our colors. And this is going to help us, especially when we have to get to rigging the head or rigging the eyes. Because looking at this right now, it can get a little confusing, especially looking at all the different layers, and we basically have a transparent character. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of our blue line sketches on all of our layers. So I'll go ahead and grab my select tool, and I'll select the neck layer, and I'll go ahead and solo this layer. Let's go ahead and zoom in. And I'm going to go to my tool properties for the select tool and select the red arrow to select by color. Click on the blue and simply delete. Now going down to the nose, and we'll do the same thing. Select the blue, delete. And for the mouths, now this looks like I have left off one of the details, pretty much how the beard is drawn on the face. I'm going to come in here, clean that up really quick. Just going to use a paintbrush. And we'll also do his mustache and his little goatee. And we'll go ahead and grab our select tool, click on the blue, and delete. Now the eyes we're going to leave alone for right now because we're going to do something special with them later on. And we'll just draw out the head here, finish out these last lines, select our blue, and delete. So I'm going to zoom out here and turn off our solo mode. And the rest of these I can pretty much do. So I'll select part of the club here and just go ahead and press delete. And same thing with the loincloth, the arms. So I'm just clicking on the areas until it grabs all of the blue. Zoom in here. And make sure I'm not selecting any of the black. Just getting rid of all of the sketches. All right, and that's pretty much it. Now the next thing I want to do is I'm going to create a new palette. So come over here to our palette area. So I'll click our Add a New Palette button, and we'll call this Koi for our character. And to get the colors, I want to use an old public domain comic, so I can sample the colors from there. So I'll click Import Images, and in my Images folder, I have the public domain Starling Comics, and I want to just go ahead and create a new layer, and click OK. And let's zoom out. Go ahead and grab my Transform tool, click once on the comic, I'm going to just move this off to the side here. Let's go to my Select tool. And what I want to do now is I want to change the default or the black line. Just type this in as black. And I'll double click on the color. And I'll select this little eyedropper here. And what I want to look for is black that I want to use for the image here. And that looks pretty good. Because I don't want it to be too blue or too yellow. So go ahead and select this. Close this out. And what I'll do now is go ahead and turn off my select by color. Just going to go ahead and draw a big lasso around my entire character, and I'll select the color here. So instantly we have all of our black lines and a little more subdued color there. And we'll add another color. And this will be Koi's skin. And we'll do a quick sample. And what I'll do at this point is grab my paint bucket and I'll start going to my different layers. I'm going to turn on my light table so I can see a little bit better and start working to fill these in. Now, one thing I haven't done yet is I've drawn all this out, I've inked them, but I have not converted these to paintbrush lines, which actually makes filling in your colors a lot easier. So I'll grab my select tool and let's go ahead and grab select by color again, and I'll click all that's on this layer, and I'll simply do Shift 7 or the ampersand to convert these to brush strokes instead of lines. And if I go back to my paint bucket now, it fills in with no problem. So once you've selected the colors you want to use, remember, go ahead and convert any pencil lines that you have, convert those lines to brush strokes because that will make filling those colors in a lot easier. At this point, we've added color to almost all of our character. This is a good time to go in and adjust some of our layers. We'll be adding color to our head elements and our hand elements a little later, but right now, I just want to do a little bit of cleanup work on our layers. So I'm going to bring up my timeline a little bit better. I'm going to zoom out so I can see the character a little better. And I'm going to first go ahead and take the neck here, and I'm going to move this down below the head. All of our head elements, the nose, the mouth, eyes, head, and the neck, they're all right here on top, which is where I need them to be for right now. I'm going to group these for a moment. So I'll select the neck, hold down my Shift key, go ahead and select the nose. I'm going to right click, and I want to group that selection. All right, I'll go ahead and collapse that. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to take the torso, and I want to bring that between the front bicep and the back bicep. So I'll simply click and drag this down. Now, what should have happened, we should have been able to see the full arm there. Let's see, all of my layers are visible. So this is just a little glitch. I'm going to see if I can fix this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the front bicep. I'm going to drag this below the torso for a moment, then drag it above the nose. I'm just kind of moving this around until I see all the elements show back up. And so there we have our full arm. And I do want to move the torso above the head. So if I zoom in now, this looks a little bit better. So we can see the back arm, the front arm, and the legs. Now the front thigh and the back thigh are pretty much in the exact spot they need to be. And we're pretty much set. So I'll just go ahead and take one last look at our layers here. Let's zoom out. So remember, when you're adjusting your layers, it works pretty much the same way it would in any other graphics program like Photoshop, Illustrator, or Flash. Whatever is on the top layer is what's going to be in front. And whatever's on the bottom layer, those will be moved to the back. It can be argued that one of the drawbacks of using hinged animation is that the hinges are very visible. Now, there are times that you may want to do that as an aesthetic move, but what I want to show you right now is how you can hide the hinges. There are two methods that I like to use. One method is to just simply paint on certain part of the hinges so everything blends together well. And the second method is more exclusive to Toon Boom Harmony, where we're going to create what's called a patch. Now, I'll show you the very simple one first, and that's going to be painting over certain hinged areas. What I want to first take a look at is the shoulder here. I'm going to zoom in and look at the front bicep. And what I want to do is go to the drawing area. So simply click the drawing tab. I'm going to hold on my spacebar just to get the hand tool. And I'm going to move this just until I see where the arm is. And I want to take my paintbrush and I want to go down to my paintbrush settings. And I want to select Repaint Brush. And by selecting this, the only thing that will be painted are areas that have been painted already. So now I'll come down and select Koi's skin. And I'll just go ahead and start painting right at the top here and hide that harsh outline. And if you notice, it's not painting anywhere outside of that area. I can even go all the way outside, but because I have this set to repaint, it's only going to paint areas that have already been painted. Now go back to our camera view. And so we have a cleaner view of what's happening there. And that still works pretty good. Now, there is a little more complex way of looking at this, and that's, say, the foot down here. I'll go ahead and select this, and we'll go to our drawing view, and let's move down to our foot, and I'll grab my paintbrush, and I'm just going to paint some of the areas there. And if we go back out to our camera view, If you note, the hinge is still showing. Now this is because of the way our hierarchy is set. The layers are set up so the thigh is above the calf and the calf is above the foot. But what I want to do right now is I'm going to nudge the foot forward. So I'm going to come down, make sure I'm on the foot layer, grab my transform tool, and I want to make sure that my camera view is active. So I'll hold down my Option key, Alt on PC, and press the down arrow just once. And so that's how we can hide that hinge. Another way of hiding hinges in Toon Boom Harmony is by creating patches. Now, there are a few more steps than just painting over a hinge, but the payoff is well worth it. So to create a patch for our character, I'm going to demonstrate this using the front forearm. So I'm going to grab my transform tool for a moment, and I'll select the front forearm. And I want to make sure this is in the original position, so I'll simply press the letter R. And the next thing I want to do is go to my timeline, and I want to select all of the frames for my forearm. So there's 3 frames here. So just hold down my Shift key and make sure all 3 frames are selected. And I want to make sure my library is visible. So I'm going to simply click and drag around my timeline to the library. Now what this does is create a symbol of the front forearm. Initially we just had a drawing, but now we have a symbol that's in our library. Now I want to edit the symbol, and we'll simply right-click on our symbol and select Edit Symbol. And now I'll go to my Select tool. And what I want to do is just select the center here, just the flesh color, but not the outline. So I'll click once, and I want to copy this, Command-C, Control-C on PC, and I'm going to add another layer. It's a simple drawing layer, and I'm going to call this Patch. And we'll click Add and Close. Now on this new layer, I'll simply paste Command-V, that's Control-V on PC, and I want to go to my timeline and make sure that this patch is there for all 3 frames. So I'll select frame 3 and extend the exposure by pressing F5. Now what I want to do is select my transform tool, and I'll select the patch we just created. And what we're going to do is nudge this forward on the Z-axis. And we're going to do that by holding down our Option key, Alt on PC, and on my keyboard I'm going to press the down arrow once. Now in order for this to work, you have to make sure, 1, the camera window is active, and you can see this by the red line around the camera, as well as you have to make sure you're using the transform tool. Alright, so now we'll go back to our main timeline. So I'm going to simply select Top. And what I want to do now is replace the forearm drawing with the forearm symbol that has the patch. So to do this, I'll select all 3 frames of my forearm drawing again. I'll go to my library. I'm going to click and drag this over, but I'm going to hold down my Control key and let go of the mouse, and I'll get a Paste Special. Now what I want to do is simply select Paste All Frames of the symbol, the full movie. Once I've done that, simply click OK. And now, if I zoom in here, you can see that there is a difference, and the hinge is not showing anymore. This looks like one solid arm. Our forearm on the timeline now looks a little different. It's no longer gray, but it has a blue tint to it, and it has a little bit of a film strip look to it. Now, if you haven't noticed any difference with this, I'll show you exactly how the patch works. I'll simply click and drag this away. And if you note, there's still the outline around the forearm, and there's an outline around the bicep. But because we've nudged the skin color forward, it covers up the bicep outline as well as the forearm outline. And this is mainly visible once these 2 pieces are brought together. Now to do a second patch, we'll do the hand. We'll select all 3 drawings of the hand, drag this to our library, we'll right-click to edit the symbol, and for the hand we're going to take a few extra steps because we haven't colored this in yet. So we'll go to our Select tool, and I'll go ahead and simply press K so we can see what type of line we're working with. And these are still outlines, so it's important to note, before you create any type of patch, you'll want to convert any of your lines to brushstrokes. So to do this, we'll go ahead and select all of our drawing, and we'll do Shift 7 or the ampersand to convert the lines to brushstrokes. And we'll go ahead and close off the rest of the drawing here. So let's grab our black color for Koi, and let's go ahead and draw that in, and we'll convert this as well. And we'll fill this in, and we would do the exact same thing for each of the other drawings. So we'll grab our Select tool, grab the flesh color, we'll copy, add another drawing layer, call this Patch, add and close, and we'll paste Command-V, Control-V on PC. And unlike we did for our forearm, we're not going to extend the exposure of this first drawing. And this is because the hand has several drawings. The second frame would have a different patch, even though we're going to paste it on the same patch layer. The patch layer will have 3 separate drawings, just as the front hand has 3 separate drawings. So we'll go back to frame 1 on our patch layer. Make sure I'm on my transform tool, and we'll select our skin color here, hold down our Option key, Alt on PC, and press the down arrow once. And that is nudging it forward in our Z-axis. And let's go back to the top of our animation, to the main camera. And we'll select all 3 frames of our front hand. We're going to drag our front hand symbol over to the timeline. And before I let go of my mouse, I'm going to hold down the Control key, then let go of the mouse, select Paste All Frames, and click OK. So again, we have our patch working because we don't see any hinges here. So I can pull this away, and that blends in perfectly. And there's our finished arm. Whether you're painting over your hinges, using symbols and patches, or a combination of both, hiding a character's hinges can help push the illusion that the puppet is one solid drawing. To rig the head, we'll be using a combination of parented drawings, pegs, bones, as well as some clear strokes. But when we're done, our character's head will appear as a single drawing. Now, right now we have all of our head pieces in a group on our timeline. So we have the nose, the mouths, and eyes, head, and the neck. So what I'm going to do now is start working on filling in some of the color here. And one of the techniques we're going to use is the stroke option with our paint. So first look at the nose. I'm going to go to my drawing option here and zoom in. And I'm going to press the K key so I can see my outlines. I go to my paint tool and go to the stroke. And I'm going to draw a simple line here to close off this area. Go back to my paint tool, grab the skin color, and we'll just fill that in. And I'm going to go to the mouths. And what I want to do here is I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool, and let's go to our paint options. And I want to paint the areas already painted. So I'm going to paint around the outside area here. And once I'm done with that, I'll grab the paint bucket and fill in the rest of the color there. Let's go to our eyes. And even though we're going to be redoing these later, I want to give them some sort of temporary color. So let's expand our color section for a moment. And I'm going to use a darker skin color for his eyelids. And let's grab white for the eyes. And the white may look a little bit off, and that's because we're using some sampled colors from our public domain comic. So let's go to the head, and let's go to our stroke tool again, and we'll close off where the hair is. And let's go to our paint, grab the hair color, and the paint tool, fill this in, fill in the base, and we'll fill in Koi's skin. And I've already filled in the neck, so we're good there. Now that all the pieces are colored, I'll come back through and make sure we have the correct pivot point for each piece. So we'll look at the nose. I'm going to turn off our strokes. Let's go back to camera view. And we'll set all of our pivot points. So let's do the nose, the mouth, the eyes. I'm just moving these where they would make sense for a rotation. And the head, I'm going to kind of place this back toward the ear a bit. Now the neck, I'm not going to worry about a rotation point at this time. So now that we have that done, what I want to do is I want to parent the nose, the mouths, and the eyes. I want to parent all of those to the head. So I'm going to go ahead and select my transform tool. And on my timeline, I'll select the nose, hold down my shift key, mouths, and eyes. And on my timeline, I'm going to drag these directly underneath the head. And now the head is the parent of the nose, mouth, and eyes, which basically means anytime we rotate the head, the nose, mouth, and eyes go along with it. But the problem is, if you look at our camera view, the nose, mouth, and eyes are now behind the head piece, which looks a little bit odd. So this is what we're going to do to fix that. On the timeline, I'm going to make sure I select the nose, mouth, and eyes. And then I want to make sure that I have the camera view selected. I'll just simply click once on the nose. And all these 3 parts, the nose, mouth, and eyes, are still selected. And I'm going to hold down my Option key, Alt on PC, and press the down arrow once. And this has basically nudged the nose, mouth, and eyes forward on the Z-axis. So even though the head is a layer above the nose, mouth, and eyes, we can still see that because we've moved all of these forward. All right, so I'll go ahead and collapse the head for now. And what I want to do next is I want to have the neck parent the head. So I'll take the head and all of its parented pieces, and I'm going to drag this directly under the neck. So the neck is now going to be the parent. And exactly what we did with the nose, mouth, and eyes. And I'm clicking once just in the head area. And because the nose, mouth, and eyes have been parented to the head, it's also going to grab those. So I'll hold down my Option key, Alt on PC, and again press the down arrow on my keyboard. Now the neck is the parent of the head, and we still have the head in front mainly because we've nudged it forward with the z-axis. Last but not least, I'm going to go ahead, and the way I want to control the neck is using the bone tool. So for a moment, I'm going to go ahead and turn off some of my layers here. I'll turn off the back arm, as well as the torso and the front arm. And I'm even going to turn off the head for a moment. So at the top of my screen, I'm going to go to the rigging tool to set up a bone deformation. So I'll click on the rigging tool. I'm going to click once at the base, once in the middle of the neck, and once at the top. Now I do want to see if I can expand the articulation just a little bit here. And now with that done, I'm going to go back to my transform tool and want to make sure that the head is now visible. And if we try to rotate this initially, we can see this is actually bending pretty good. There is one small problem though. If we bend the head too forward, you'll see the face starts to distort a little bit. So I'm going to do Command Z. Now, in order to fix this, I'll select the head layer, and I'll go up here to add a new layer. And what I want to select is kinematic output. Now, basically what this means is it's going to stop the bone deformation, and it will not allow the face to be distorted, even though the neck is distorted. So now if I first try this, we're not moving the head at all. So I'm going to do Command Z, and I'm going to collapse the kinematic output. And I need to make sure that it is directly under the bone. I still have the neck on top, and I've set the kinematic output directly under that. So it's not parented to the neck, it's just all under the bone. So now if I rotate this, we have almost everything working except for we do need to clean up a little bit of the head, the little point on the chin. So I'll open this up, and we'll go to the head layers, and go to our drawing section. Let's go down to where the mouths are. And I can just take my eraser tool and clean up this one little section. Just round that off a little more. Okay, and now what I want to do is go to the head layer, and I'll get rid of this extra line here. I'll just grab my paintbrush tool, make sure I'm on the skin color, and I only want to paint what's already been painted, so I have that selection of the repaint brush. I'll come down here to the base and just paint out the neck a little bit. Let's go back to camera view and go to our transform tool. And now if we move the neck, this looks a little bit cleaner. Now that we have our basic head motion rigged, we're able to add a few other elements to bring our character to life, like animating the eyes, as well as adding mouths for the lip sync. To rig our character's eyes, we're going to be using symbols, a peg, and also we're going to be nudging on the z-axis. Now to get started, we're going to create a right eyeball as well as a left eyeball. So I'm going to come down to my head group. I'm going to expand this and expand the head section. And we finally get to where the eyes are. I'm going to create a new drawing layer, and I'm going to simply call this the right eye, or RTI, and click Add and Close. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my ellipse tool, and let's get to our colors. I'm going to expand the color section, make sure I'm using the right color. Let's zoom into the eyes here a moment. And I'm going to click and drag out a basic little circle here, a little bit more of an oval, and let go of the mouse. Now, if you note, as soon as I did that, the eye disappeared. Now, the reason is we've nudged the head as well as the eye layers on the z-axis, and we've moved all of those forward. So to do the same thing for the eyeball, we'll grab our transform tool, make sure we're in the camera view. I'm going to hold down my Option key, Alt on PC, and use the down arrow and just press it once, and that has brought it forward. Now, a way of looking at this, if you're wondering, okay, why are you pressing down? Look at the arrows more as if you press the down, that's the arrow that's pointing toward you. So you're bringing the image or the drawing forward toward you using that little down arrow. All right, now let's grab our paint tool and we'll fill that eye. And let's set our pivot point. I'll go to my advanced animation tools to rotate. I'm going to zoom out here so I can see exactly where that pivot point initially is. And it's right here. So we'll drag it right up to the center of the eye. Let's zoom in so we can see what's happening. So we have that set. And now that we have all of that done, I'm just going to duplicate this layer. And that way we can create the left eye. So right click, and I'll select Duplicate Selected Layers. We'll just go ahead and label this left. And let's grab our transform tool. And we'll move this right to the other side here. And I am going to scale this one down a little bit since it's supposed to be further back. And now we have both the right and the left eye. Now the last thing I want to do is go ahead and set these to a peg, and that way I can control both of them as well as control them individually. So I'll select the right eye, and let's go ahead and click on Add Peg, and we'll make sure the right eye and left eye, I'm going to go ahead and drag this so the peg is parenting both the right and the left eye. And we'll select the peg. Let's zoom out here, and I'm going to click on the pivot point and move that dead center. Looks good. Now the last thing we need to do is we want to make sure that the eyelids are in front of the eyeballs, but the whites need to be behind the eyeballs. Now the way we're going to do that is by creating a symbol. So I'm going to go over and make sure I can view my library. And I just want to make sure the symbols area is visible. And we'll take this frame for the eyes, and I'm going to drag this straight to the library. And now we have the eye symbol. So right click and go to Edit Symbol. Now what I want to do here is I want to place the whites of the eyes on their own layer. So grab my Select tool, click one of the whites, hold down my Shift key, grab the other, and we'll cut Command X, Control X on PC. Now add another drawing layer, and I'll simply call this whites. Add and close, and we'll go ahead and paste. Now to make sure that the eyelids move forward, we're going to select the eyes layer, grab our Transform tool, and we're going to nudge these forward on the Z-axis. So I want to make sure my camera view is active. I'm going to hold down my Option key and press the down arrow just once. And now we'll go back to our top view. And we still have the drawings of the eyes here, but what we're going to do is swap them out for the symbol we just created. So let's find the eyes there. And I want to drag the eye symbol from the library. I'm going to drag this directly on top of the eyes drawing, and that's going to replace it. And now if you notice, the eyelids are covering up the eyeballs. Now you could push this rig even further by adding drawing substitutions to show different moods, or even separate the eyes to give the character the ability to wink or blink. To make our character blink, we're going to be using one of my favorite features in Toon Boom Harmony, and that's drawing substitutions. I'll show you a couple of shortcuts and create eye blinks just by adding 2 drawings and then calling on those drawings via drawing substitutions. Now to get started, I'm going to go to my library to work on the eye symbol. So I'll simply right-click and select Edit Symbol. Now one of the first things I need to do is I'm going to expand the exposure here from just being 1 frame to 3 frames. So click this red bar right up at the top, and I'll just drag this over. So it's now 3 frames. Now the next thing I'm going to do is draw out the other 2 drawings for the eye blink. So I'm going to go ahead and select frame 2 on our eyes layer. And to make sure I can see what I'm doing, I'm going to turn on the onion skin, and I want to go ahead and grab my pencil tool, and we'll grab the main color, black, and let's zoom in here. And I'm just going to draw out a squished down version of the eyes here. And I'll just draw the eyelid a little bit lower. And for the next frame, I'll select frame 3, and I'm going to squish these down even a little bit further. So we have a nice little squash and stretch, make the eyes appear a little bit rubbery. Okay, now what I want to do is convert all of my pencil lines to brushstrokes. So to do this, I'll do Command A, Control A on PC, and then I'm going to press the ampersand key or Shift 7, and that will convert my lines to brushstrokes. And I'll do the same thing for frame 2. We'll do Command A, and then we'll do Shift 7. Now that we have that done, let's go ahead and add some color. I'll first add the eyelid color, which is going to be the darker color. So I'll select Koi Skin Dark, grab my paint tool, and I'll fill in the eyelids. Let's go to the next frame, and I'll fill in both the upper and lower eyelids. Last but not least, we're going to do the whites of the eyes, and we're going to first fill them in on the eyelid layer, and then cut those and place them on the whites layer. So I'll select frame 2, and grab our white color, and I'm going to go ahead and fill this in. Now I'll grab my Select tool, and I'll select both white areas. I'll click on one, hold down my Shift key, select the second one, and we're going to cut these. Command X, Control X on PC, and we're going to go to the whites layer. Now the reason we're doing this is the whites are supposed to be on one Z-axis, and the eyelids are moved forward on a separate Z-axis. So by doing this, we're going to still have the eyelids covering up the eyeballs. So simply go ahead and paste, Command V, Control V on PC, and now we can go back to our top view. Now to show the blink, what I want to do is go ahead and extend all of my layers to frame 60. And then we're going to do some drawing substitutions on the eye layer and call on those different drawings we just created. So go ahead and select frame 60. I'm going to scroll down and select just the bottom one here, all the way to the color card, and I'll simply press F5. Now I don't want to overwrite, I just want to insert. Okay, I'll go ahead and turn off my onion skin. And what I want to do now is I'll open up the head, and let's get to our eyes layer. And I'm going to scrub my playhead forward to about frame 20. And on the eyes layer, I'm going to use the parameters here and change the frame number. Now, if you don't see the parameters, what you'll simply do is come over here and click the hide the parameters view, and you should be able to see it. So what I'll do now is move this forward to drawing 2. And I'm not going to worry about moving the eyeballs just yet. And now I'll scrub my playhead forward about 2 more frames, and then we'll move it to drawing 3. And we're going to hold the eyes closed for a few frames, so I'll skip ahead about 4. And then we'll go back to drawing 2, go 1 frame forward, and go back to drawing 1. That's not too bad. And now I can go in and adjust my eyes. Now, we didn't need to animate or add any keyframes to call on our drawing substitutions. But if you want the eyes to move, you will need to animate those. So I'll turn on my animate button, select the transform, and right here where the eyes are about to blink, we'll insert a keyframe, F6. And we know the eyes are coming down at this point. So I'm going to zoom in here, and we'll move the eyes down a bit. And once the eyes open, now we're going to drop in a keyframe right before the eyes open. So let's do F6. What I want to do here is actually have them look a different direction. So I'll simply press Shift B, and that way I can control other eye individually, then select our right eye and move that over a bit. All right, and last but not least, we'll move this little guy right back in there. So now if we play this, we now have a functioning eye blink. By using a few extra drawings and shortcuts, you're able to call on the drawing substitutions to add blinks and a little more life to your character. In order to easily work with our character via a single layer, as well as has the ability to store that character in the library, we're going to create a master peg. Now, before we store our character, there are a few things we need to check to make sure it's going to work properly once it's been brought out of the library. So the things we're going to be looking for is to make sure that each of the limbs are moving in front where they should be in front, and they're also moved in the back where they should be moved in the back. And this is double checking where our z-axes are. So I'll grab the transform tool, and I'll click on the arm, for instance, here, the front arm, and I'm just going to rotate this and make sure the arm is where it should be. And I'll do the same with the leg here. I'll just simply press B to get the thigh, and just making sure that's showing up in the right space. And let's do the same thing with the back leg. I'll press the letter B to get the thigh. Looks good. And I'm also going to go ahead and turn off the torso for a moment, just so I can take a look at all the pieces and make sure they're in the right space. All right, that looks good. And now I want to zoom in and check the eyes and the face. I'm going to scrub through here. Not bad. I may want to adjust the nose a little bit. So I'm going to move this out just a bit. And this is the time that you would go in and do any types of tweaks, like, for instance, there's almost too much of the nose cutting into the eye here. So let me go into the drawing mode and come in and just trim this up a little bit. Go back to camera mode. All right, and that looks a little better. And now I'm going to go ahead and collapse all of our sections here. And what I want to do right now is go ahead and add a peg. So I'll select the front bicep, and I'm going to come up here and select Add Peg. Now, the first thing I want to do is simply double-click, and I want to change the name of this. So this is going to be Koi, and this is our side view. And I'll go ahead and close this. And for our timeline, I'm going to bring this up a bit. I want to make sure we grab the torso and all of the other layers here and move them under the peg. Just click and drag this directly under, and then we'll move the front bicep back up to the top. And I'm now going to collapse the peg. Looks good. And this is also a good time to come in and just adjust where I would like the character to be when I bring this out of the library. Adjusting some of the hands here. That looks good. And what I want to do now is I'll select the very first frame of our peg, and I want to adjust where the pivot point is. Now, normally, if a character is upright and on 2 legs, I will typically place the pivot point at the base. So that's what we're going to do here. Select the rotate tool. I'm going to drag this down toward the base. Now, the reason we do that, it's because if we decide in our animation, we can have him lean either forward or lean back, and that's based on where the pivot point is. So let's do Command Z. And last but not least, we're going to place a keyframe on the very first frame of each of our layers. And we're able to do this because our peg is collapsed right now. So I'll select the very first frame and simply enter a keyframe, F6. Now, if I expand this, you see that there is a keyframe on all of our character's layers. And last but not least, it's time to store our character in our library. So I'll go to the library, and there are two different spaces for the library. If I wanted to work with our character in this particular scene, I would use simply symbols. But because I want to have this character available for other scenes and have the ability to pull him into other Harmony documents, I want to select Stage Essentials. And right now this is locked, so I'm going to right-click and select Write to Modify. Okay, I'll then click on this very first keyframe and drag this straight to the library. And it's going to give me the option of giving the template a name. And I'm going to go ahead and stick with what we have set up for the peg, which is Koi Side. And it's also letting us know this is a peg, and the TPL stands for template. So I'll go ahead and click OK. By creating a master peg, we were able to have our character take up less space on the timeline, as well as save our character in the library so we can use him in other scenes. Creating a convincing walk cycle is one of the most difficult tasks in animation, and jobs have been won and lost because of them. That being said, I want to show you some tricks that might make creating a walk cycle easier. Now, before I get into this, I do want to remind you of a few things of how to move up and down the child and parent hierarchies just by quick keys, because we're going to be using this a lot throughout setting up our keys. So I'll go to my transform tool, and if I select my hand here, I can move up the hierarchy simply by pressing B. And if I press B again, it goes up even further. Now to move down the hierarchy, I'll do Shift B. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Technically, a walk cycle is two poses, and then those same two poses just reversed. So I want to start creating my first pose here. I'm going to click on my arm. I'm going to rotate this back a little bit. And I'll do Shift B to move down the hierarchy. All right, and I'll select the other arm here. I'll rotate this down. Press the letter B to move up the hierarchy. And I want to have the legs do the opposite of what the arms are doing. So the front arm is pointing toward the back. So we'll have the front leg point toward the front. So press B to go up the hierarchy. All right, so we'll select the back leg and press B to make sure we're up at the hierarchy of the thigh. All right, looks pretty good. And because we have our ground here, I do want to bring him down a little bit. I'm making sure my animate button is turned off at this point, and I'm just going to move our character down so he's touching the ground. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is go ahead and enter my other keys. So to do this, I want to select frame 5, and I'll extend the exposure by pressing F5. And I want to do the same for the floor. So select frame 5 and press F5. Okay, and now on my Koi layer, I want to insert a keyframe. Let's do F6. And I'll also insert one on frame 3, F6. Now, frames 1 and 3, I'm going to leave exactly as they are. But for frame 2, I want to do the reverse of what's in frame 1. So I'll simply select frame 2, and I'll go to my transform tools. And now I want to make sure that my animate button is turned on. So to do the reverse, I'll simply select the front arm, and I rotate this forward. We'll select the back arm, and we'll rotate this backwards. Okay? We'll select the leg here, and this is our back leg, I believe. And actually, let's double check here. We'll go ahead and turn off our torso. Actually, this is our front leg. So I'll simply press B to move up the hierarchy. So we'll flip this backward, and we'll select the back leg and move it forward. And I'll turn back on our torso here, and we'll collapse our peg. So we have our keyframe in frame 1, and then we're doing the reverse of this in frame 2. And in frame 3, we're back to the way it looks in frame 1. Now that we have this set up, we'll select frames 2 and 3, and we're going to move those forward just one frame. Now in doing this, we have a tween that's set up right between there on frame 2. So we'll do the same thing. This time we'll select what is now frame 4, and we'll move this over one frame. So at frames 2 and 4, we basically have our character kind of standing up straight. So this is where we start working on our second pose. So I'm going to click on frame 2, and I want to move our character up a little bit. And we're pretty much going to be creating a figure 4 with his legs. So what I'll do is select our back leg, and I want to bend this up a little bit. I'm going to do Shift B, move down our hierarchy, and bend foot a little bit, and maybe even move this. And we'll press B, and then press B again to move back up the hierarchy. So now what we're going to do is the same thing on frame 4, but we're going to do it in reverse. So the front leg will be forming the figure 4. So I'll select frame 4. And I want to make sure this is also the same height. So I'm going to turn on my onion skin here. And we'll move Koi up. Okay. And I'll bend the front leg. And let's do the letter B to move up the hierarchy a little bit. Let's do Shift B to move back down. And Shift B one last time. All right. Now I'll turn off my onion skin. We now have several of our keys set up. We've got a nice little rise and fall happening with our character. Now just remember, when creating a walk cycle, your key poses are very important, not only to the cycle itself, but to the overall feel of the character. With our key poses finished, we'll now work on the timing and the animation between those keys. Now, there are a couple things to think about when you're setting up the animation of this walk cycle. And one of those is just how fast is your character walking? And part of what that depends on is the frame rate that you're running. Now, I'm working at 24 frames per second, and any of the changes we're going to make here is based on 24 frames per second. What I want to do now is I'm going to start separating our keys. So I'll select frame 2, hold down my Shift key, and select frame 5. And I want to click and drag out to about frame 8 here. And if I scrub my playhead, we can see our character moving. We already have the tweens that are happening there. Now, if you do not see this, it may be because you have your auto tweens turned off, or you may have this set up for a stop motion keyframe. To show you what I mean, I'm simply going to press Command L, Control L on PC. And if this is what you're seeing, what you'll need to do is simply press Command K. And this will give you a motion between your keys. So now I'll select our next set of keys. And we stopped at 8, so the next one we're going to stop at 16. And we'll grab the last 2 keys. And we'll stop this one at about 24. And the last one will stop at 32. Now let's see how this looks. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the loop for our playback and click play. All right, now there are a couple of things we need to change. One, we do need to extend our floor. So I'll select frame 32 and extend the exposure of our floor by pressing F5. And 2, we want this loop to happen without seeing all of the blank space after this. So I'll come over here, and if you look on our timeline, there's this little black triangle. And this will give a temporary stop to where our animation is. So I'll click on that triangle. I'm just going to drag that right down, right at frame 32, and I'll click play again. Okay, now that's not bad, but we do need to change one thing, and that's mainly because frame 1, as well as frame 32, are identical. And that's going to cause a little bit of a drag in our animation. So to stop this, we're going to move our triangle forward 1 frame, and we'll play again. And now we have our tweens set. So by letting Harmony create our tweens for us, we've been able to bring our character's walk cycle one step closer to completion. Now that we have our basic walk cycle complete, we can add more life and character to our walk cycle by adjusting our key poses. We'll first give our character's head some movement, and then adjust the arms to show more energy. So to get started, I want to make sure that my animate button is turned on. And I want to go to frame 1. And at this point is when our character is at a lower point. So what I want to do here is I want to select the neck and kind of lean his head toward the back. So I'll click once on the neck, and I want to be able to see the bone that I've placed in the neck. So I'm going to turn on Show Selected Deformer. I'm going to rotate his head a little backward. Okay, and I'm going to skip one of the keyframes because this is when he's up. Let's go to the next keyframe, and we'll rotate his head backwards here. And last but not least, we should also go ahead and adjust this very last frame, but the trick I'm going to do, because frame 32 should be the exact same as frame 31, and that's how we get our cycle, I'll simply select frame 1 on that key, and I'll copy, Command-C, Control-C on PC, select frame 32, and let's go ahead and paste, Command-V, Control V on PC. I'm going to click once to deselect everything, and if I play this, just by moving his head just a little bit on those key poses, we've given a lot more personality to this walk. Now the next thing I'll do is I'll select these keys here, and I want to bend the arms a bit. So I'm going to rotate the arm down, and I'll simply press the letter B to go up the hierarchy, and rotate the arm up a little bit, and we'll select our back arm, kind of give that a little bit of bend as well. Press the letter B and rotate it upward. Now go to our next key where our character is down, and I'll do the same by rotating the arms. Press the letter B. Let's go up the hierarchy a little bit. And on the back arm, press the letter B and rotate upward again. Again, we'll select frame 1, copy the keyframe, go to frame 32, and you can already see the difference and just how much more life there is between frame 1 and frame 32. Because these are supposed to be alike, I'll make sure I go to frame 1. Let's copy, Command-C, Control-C on PC, select frame 32, and we'll paste, Command-V. So let's play back our animation. Once you know the basic rules of adjusting your key poses, you can add even more life to your character's movements, and thereby stop the walk cycle from looking stiff. We now have our character walking in place, and that's great if our background is moving. But what if we want the background to be still and have the character move? In order to do this, we'll need to add our walk cycle to a peg. So what I'll do first is I'll select our walk cycle here, and I want to go ahead and add this to a peg. So I do want to change the name of this peg, and I'll just simply call this walk across. I'll now collapse this peg, and you can see that we have our keys still visible. Now I'll turn on my animate button, and let's select also our transform tool. And I want to make sure that I give our new peg the correct pivot point. So I'm going to go ahead and click on our advanced animation and rotate so we can bring this right down to the base. I'm going to insert a keyframe on frame 1 of our walk peg. So we'll do F6. And what I can do is simply go to our last keyframe here. And let's grab our transform. And if I wanted to have the character walk all the way across the scene, I could just drag it over. And let's go ahead and play this. Now this isn't bad, except for one major thing. If we look at the way this character is moving, we can see his feet are sliding. Now, that might work if we weren't actually seeing his feet. But because we are, we're going to need to adjust a few things. So I'm going to undo that, Command-Z. And what I want to do now is I'm going to use a combination of onion skin as well as stop motion keyframes to make our character walk across the scene without his feet sliding. So I'm selecting this first keyframe. I want to turn on our onion skin, and I'll now select this next key, and we can see all of the tweens. Well, I don't want to see this much information, so I want to select this first keyframe, and I want to simply press Command-L. And what that's going to do is going to create a stop motion keyframe, which means it won't do any tweens from Harmony. So now if I select frame 8, we only see that one drawing. Now what I can do is I see that this foot here, that was previous, this is where the heel is, so I'm going to move our character forward so his heel matches where the last location was. So go to the previous keyframe and the next keyframe. And now, while I have this keyframe selected, I'll also do Command-L, which is making a stop motion keyframe. I'll select the very next key. And if you notice, I have my brackets set up so they're not giving too much information. So now I see where the heel is supposed to be again. So this is where the foot's supposed to be. And we'll move this forward to match up the toe. Again, I'm just checking my keys and making sure they make sense. So we'll select our next keyframe. And again, we have all those extra frames. We don't need those just yet. So I'll go back to the previous keyframe, and I'll do Command-L. All right. Select our newest keyframe, which is now at frame 24. And we'll move our character forward. And last but not least, we'll grab this last keyframe here. All right, and we'll turn off our tweens, Command-L. And we'll slide this character forward again. Okay. So now we have all of our keys set. But if we play this, well, it's very stiff, and that's because we haven't turned our tweens back on. So let's go ahead and do that. So select the first keyframe, and we'll do Command K instead of Command L, and Command K on the next one, and the remaining keys. I'm going to turn off our onion skin, and we'll play this back. And now we have our character walking across the scene. So by adding our walk cycle to a peg, we're now able to have our character walk across the scene instead of just walking in place. Just remember to adjust your animation to avoid your character's feet from sliding. An important part of almost any character animation is giving the character the ability to speak. Now, in cutout animation, this is done by syncing up different mouth shapes to recorded voiceovers or sounds. These mouth shapes are referred to as phonemes, and there can be anywhere from about 4 to 12 different mouth shapes to show the basic sounds of speech. Now, you don't have to guess where you would find these. Actually, Toon Boom has a really good reference for them. So if you go up to your menu and go to Help, and come down to select Getting Started. Now, this is Toon Boom Harmony's Getting Started guide, and you can jump right to page 70, and I'll just zoom in here. Here are the basic phonemes that Toon Boom Harmony uses. Now, don't get me wrong, you can use more than these, but this is a good place to start, especially if you're planning on using Toon Boom's automatic lip sync. So each of these shapes are here, and you can't look at the letters and think, okay, this is B, this is the sound that B would make, and this is definitely not the sound that F would make. But these letters work in tandem with Toon Boom's automatic lip sync. And these are the basic shapes we have for our character. So our next step, we're going to basically go in to each of our frame numbers that have these shapes and change their frame numbers to these corresponding letters. So let's go back to our document here, and I'm working in the document adding phonemes. So let's move up a little bit, and I want to open up our timeline. I'm going to go into the head group, scroll all the way down, and find the mouths layer. Now, if we take a look at this, you can scroll across, and you can see all the different mouth shapes here. Now, if we take a look at our drawing substitution area, I'm just going to expand this down a little bit. Each one of the drawings has a frame number, and what we need to do is change that frame number to a corresponding letter. Now, these are the letters that are based on the chart we saw in the lip sync document. So to do this, I'll simply select a frame, and I'll right-click, go to Drawings, and select Rename Drawing. So instead of 1, I'm going to simply call this A, and I'll click OK. And we'll do the same thing for the next drawing. And we'll rename this to B. We'll go to our next drawing, and I'm just going to start using the shortcut, which is Command D or Control D on PC. This will be C, D, E, this will be F, G, and the last one, which should be a closed mouth here, is actually not going to be H, but it will be X. So I'll do Command D, and that will be X. Now, this extra shape is the letter L. So for this one, I'll simply do Command D, and I'm going to call this L. Now, out of all of the automated different shape sounds that are there, the letter L have not really noticed there, so I like to have this one as an extra one. And we'll simply call this one, give it 2 X's. And this is the same as our X, but it's more of an open mouth. So go ahead and click OK. Now, by no means are you limited to just these phonemes. You can add many more, and some animators even create sets of phonemes based on moods. Just remember, no matter how many you have, it's always a good practice to name them. When it comes to importing sound in Toon Boom Harmony, you can import a WAV, AIF, MP3 format, and even MOV or movie format. But when it comes to importing voices for characters, there are some extra steps you should take, especially if you plan on using Harmony's auto lip sync feature. Now, just to name a few of those, when you're importing something, you want to make sure you have as clean a sound as possible. That is, no background noise. So if you're trying to record something in a coffee shop or, I don't know, a noisy room or something like that, you want to avoid having any extra noise in the background. In addition to this, if you're doing a dialogue or a conversation with multiple characters, you want to record those voices individually and not have multiple voices on the same track. And last but not least, if you're recording a music video, don't try to bring in the actual piece of music with vocals on it. It would be best if you were to sing along with the song and just record your voice without that music in the background. And that way, it's going to be a lot easier to sync, especially if you're using the lip sync feature. So what I want to do is go ahead and import a sound here for our character Koi. So go to File, come down to Import, and I want to go to Import Sound. And I'll simply go to my sound files, and we have the MP3 of Koi the Caveman. So I'll click Open. And if you look at the top line here, it has imported my sound. And this already looks a little bit different than all of our other layers. But one thing I want to point out directly is this little 100% here has nothing to do with the volume. It basically has to do with the size that the waveform is shown on the timeline. Now, if you scrub your playhead, there's nothing we hear. And if we decide to play, there's still nothing we can hear. And this is because, by default, both the speakers and the scrubbing ability is turned off. So go ahead and turn on sound. And right next to it is this little speaker with an S, and that's for the scrubbing. So now I can play this.
Excuse me, miss.
And I can also scrub through the timeline.
Excuse me, miss.
Now, I do know that this is not the full phrase, but exactly how am I going to find out how long this actual sound is? And the quick way to do that is to simply come here, and I'm going to double click on this little icon for the layer, this music note here. And this is going to open up our sound element editor. So if I look at the top here, it's showing me all of the frames, and I'm going to scroll all the way to the end here. And I see that the sound actually stops at frame 252. And I can even listen to this.
Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to be rude, but it's pronounced Appalachia, not Appalachia.
All right. So now that I have that information, I'll go ahead and close this window. And I'll go to Scene, come down to Scene Length, and I'll go ahead and extend this out to frame 252. And now if I scroll along my timeline, I can see all of the sound that's there. And while I'm here, I'll go ahead and select my layer for my Koi character, as well as all the background layers. So I'll hold down my Shift key, select all those layers, and I'll extend the exposure by doing F5. So I'll go back to the beginning here, get my playhead at the very beginning, and click play.
Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to be rude, but it's pronounced Appalachia, not Appalachia.
So now we have the full sound playing. When getting your audio ready for importing to Harmony, get as clean a sound as possible and make sure you only import the portions of the sound that you're going to need. And that way you can keep the file size down when it comes to your Toon Boom Harmony file. One of Toon Boom software's biggest features is its ability to auto lip sync, and Harmony Essentials is no different. Now, even if you prefer doing lip sync by hand, as I do, the auto lip sync can still save you a lot of time and money. Now, when you're talking about using the auto lip sync, you definitely want to make sure you have a clean sound coming in. So we've already imported our sound, and it's pretty decent. You can even look at the waveform here. So there's not a lot of noise when there's no talking. And the other part of that is to go into the mouth. Let me zoom in here. And make sure you've gone through and use the different letter names for the phonemes. Now, these are the letters according to Toon Boom, so you can actually set up the different phonemes so it pays attention once it starts using the auto lip sync feature. So now that we have that done, I'm going to simply play my sound a moment.
Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to be rude, but it's pronounced Appalachia, not Appalachia.
All right. So I'll scroll back up to the top here and go to frame 1. And to start working on the auto lip sync, what I need to do is I need to select layer properties. Now, that's not open at this point, but I want to first go ahead and select my sound layer where I have my caveman voice. And then I want to go to Windows and come down and select layer properties. Now, I would normally go ahead and pair layer properties with one of my other windows, but because I am going to need this a little bit wider, I'm just going to let it float here. And this is also why I made sure I selected my voice layer before opening layer properties. So now what I have to do is make sure that my mouth layer is mapped to all of the information that came from the auto lip sync detection. So to do this, I'll simply click on Map, And we have the source layer is caveman voice, and the destination layer, we'll select here, come down and find mouths. Now, technically, we could have actually left all of the numbers the way they were, but it's my preference to usually go in and just make them all of the corresponding letters. So I'll go ahead and click OK, and I'll go ahead and close out this window, and I'm going to scroll down to take a look at my mouths layer. And as you see these little lines here, we can tell that there's already some changes that have been made. And this is what the auto lip sync looks like, because each one of these little lines means that there is a drawing substitution and a different mouth phoneme has been called on. So let's play this and see what it looks like.
Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to be rude, but it's pronounced Appalachia, not Appalachia.
And there you have it. Now, auto lip sync isn't perfect, as you can see, but just remember to name your mouth or phoneme drawings and get as clean a sound as possible, and auto lip sync can still give you a good head start. One reason people are a little reluctant to using the auto lip sync because they think that you can't alter the results. Now, nothing could be farther from the truth. Just by using a few shortcut keys, you can edit to get your lip sync just right. So I want to take a quick look at what Harmony has done for the automatic lip sync here. And I'm just going to play my animation.
Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to be rude, but it's pronounced Appalachia, not Appalachia.
All right. Now, there are a few things that I want to change. In particular, I'm noticing that there's movement when there is no sound. So before I start doing any movement here, I'm going to go and make sure my library is visible. And I'll click on my mouth layer, and so we can see the different mouths that are being called on right in our drawing substitutions. And I can also see them here in parameters. And 9 times out of 10, I'm going to be using a combination of either parameters, my keyboard shortcuts, or the drawing substitution area. So the first thing I want to do is correct any of the areas where there is no sound. So I'm just going to scrub. So we have some movement here. And we're moving from the B mouth shape to the X mouth shape. So I'll select this whole little area of frames here. And I'll make sure all of this is scrubbed to B, and I'm just using my parameters to dial that in. And we're bouncing back and forth between B and X again here. So this looks like X is just held there. Goes to B, then back to X. So I'm going to select this series of frames here and come back over to my parameters and slide that so it is just at X. All right, so that's most of the little silent part, so there's no weird happenings there. And this is also why you want to make sure when you're recording, there's no noise or extra things in the background. So the next thing I want to do is where my character says rude. I don't think there's like any type of ooh or o sound that's happening with the mouth when that's played.
Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to be rude.
Okay, so now I want to fix that.
Miss, I don't mean to be rude. I don't mean to be rude.
So I'm noticing around frame 90 is when we can hear rude.
Mean to be rude.
So instead of having the mouth closed here, I'm going to scrub until I find the shape that I need, which is shape F.
Mean to be rude.
So now if I play this.
Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to be rude, but it's pronounced Appalachia, not Appalachia.
All right, and the last thing I'm going to do is come in and where he says miss, I want it to look like he's still holding the S sound.
Excuse me, miss. Excuse me, miss.
So here, it looks like he's doing a F sound. I'm going to select this frame in this series of frames here, and I want to find this last little S sound.
Say miss. I don't mean to be rude.
And now if I play this again.
Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to be rude, but it's pronounced Appalachia, not Appalachia.
All right. And one last thing I'll do is where he says the last little thing of Appalachia. And I kind of like this mouth here, so that's going to be C. So I'll select this series of frames here and just let all of that be C. Now, if you're noticing, there is a little bit of a hesitation. So what I'm usually doing is I'll select the frames and I'm not just typing it in or just dragging it here. I do have to let go of my mouse and let that be set before I can move on.
Excuse me, miss. I don't mean to be rude, but it's pronounced Appalachia, not Appalachia.
And so there I've gone in and adjusted what the auto lip sync has done. Now, depending on how much time you have, you can keep adjusting that until you get it exactly the way you want it. Just remember, the auto lip sync isn't written in stone and can easily be edited on the timeline. You can even push editing your lip sync further by swapping out the current phonemes to match your character's mood. The glow effect works a little different than some of the other effects. Basically, adding the glow effect to a layer turns that layer into the effect. So if you want to see the layer as well as the effect, you're going to need two layers, one for the art and one for the effect. To show you an example of this, I'm going to add a glow to the sun in this scene. So I'm going to scroll down to the sun layer, and before I add the effect, I want to right-click, and I want to clone the selected layer, and I'm going to do drawings and timing. On the clone, I'm going to change the name, so I know this is for the glow. And now I'm going to add the effect of the glow. Now there are several ways of doing this. I can select this layer and simply come to the top and add the effect of glow. I can also right-click on the layer and insert the effect glow. And last but not least, I can go to the menu bar to insert, effects, and glow. Now my preference is just simply to right-click. So right-click, insert, effect, and glow. Now to see the properties, I can simply double-click here, and I see all of the layer properties. But if I want to have a more accessible way of getting to this, I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and I'll go to Windows, open up Layer Properties, and I'm going to add this into the same area as my tool properties. So I'll click and drag this tab directly on top of the other tabs here, and let go. All right, and the first thing I want to do is I'm going to increase the radius of the blur. So I'm going to type this to about 30 and scroll down. And the next thing I want to change is the actual color. So I'll click this little gray bar here. And I'm going to sample one of the colors here that's pretty close to what I want to have. And I want it to be a really bright yellow. All right, and so that looks good. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to bring up the intensity to about 3. Now at this point, we do not see anything that's happening. And that's because we're not in our rendered view at this point. So to see what the effect looks like, come down here and we'll click on Render View. We're looking at this right now, and it's okay, but we want to make a few changes here. I'm going to bring down the opacity, or the alpha, and we'll just type in about 150. And I'm also going to bring down the intensity to about 1. And we'll do one last thing here. I'm going to bring the radius, I'm going to bring this up about double to see how this looks. And now we have the glow added to our drawing. So we have the glow layer as well as the sun layer. Now to show you what this would look like if we did not clone those layers initially, I'm going to turn off the artwork layer. And so we would just see the glow. But if we add the artwork back in, we have the artwork as well as our glow. So when using the glow effect, you'll need to clone your layer and the layer's timing. This will ensure that both the art and the effect are showing whether it's still or animated. In order to give a cast shadow to our character, we'll be using a combination of two effects. One, the shadow, and two, to distort the shadow, we'll be using a quad map. Now, when adding an effect to a rigged character versus a drawing, there is an additional step, and that is we have to group the character's layers. Then we'll apply the effect to the group. So we'll first take a look at our peg here for our character Koi, and I'm going to expand this And I see all of the layers here, so I'm going to scroll all the way down until I see the last layer, and that's the layer group for the thigh. And I'm selecting all of these layers, and I want to right-click and group this selection. And I'll go ahead and change the name to Koi Group. All right, I'll just go ahead and leave that hyphen there. Now, the shadow effect works kind of like the glow effect in that when you apply it to a layer or even to a group, it's going to take over that entire group or layer. So in order to see the effect as well as the group or the layer, you'll have to have two different layers. So to go ahead and do this, we're going to select our group and we'll right click here. And I want to clone this group, and I'm just going to use clone selected layers, drawings, and timing. And so I'll change the name here. Just type in shadow. So what I'll do now is simply insert our effect of the shadow. So I'll right click on this layer, go to insert, come down to effects, and select shadow. Now in order to see this, I'm going to simply go to our render view, and I'll turn off the top layer. And so now we can see the shadow that we've created. But in order to make this a cast shadow, we're going to need to use our quad map to distort and move the shadow so it's being cast by the sun. So go back to our normal view. And for our shadow layer, I'll right click, go to insert, and select quad map. Now in order to see this, I want to show the controls. So go up near my top view here and click show control. And so now I see these four corners. And what I want to do is start to move and position this so it looks like the shadow is being cast. So I'll select my transform tool, and I'm going to go ahead and take this middle area here and drag this all the way down. So this is flipped. We'll zoom out. And then I'm going to move this back up toward the original drawing. Now I'll turn back on the original drawing so we can see where we need to place our shadow. I'm going to zoom out here. Okay. And now to see the final result, I'll go back to the render view and I'll turn off our controls. And there we have our cast shadow. So when using the shadow effect or any effect on a rigged character, be sure to group the character first, then duplicate that group to see the character as well as the effect. If one effect can really help push the illusion of the depth of field, it's the blur effect. Now, you can add the blur effect to any drawing or symbol as well as animate the blur amount over time. So what I want to do here is I want to take the layer with our palm tree and rock here, and I want to add the effect of a blur. So to do this, I can either right click and select insert and come down to blur, or I can simply add a layer, come down to effects, and go to blur. To go ahead and set up our blur, I'm going to expand our layer here and make sure the blur layer is selected. And I want to go ahead and select layer properties. Now, if you don't see layer properties, simply go to Windows, come down and open layer properties. So for the radius, or how intense I'd like this blur to be, I'm going to simply type in 6 to start with. And to see my blur in action, I'm going to have to go to the render view. So I'll simply come down here and select render view. And we can now see our tree is actually blurred out. So I can change this amount. Let's try 3. And it's a little less intense. And let's try 9. Now you can also change the quality. However, I usually just keep mine at high, because if we do turn this to low, it's going to be very pixelated. So I'm going to go ahead and place this back at 6. And there we have our blur. By using the blur effect, you can add more depth to your scenes or characters. Just remember to use the render view to see the final result. The cutter effect is a pretty cool effect, but it can also seem confusing. It's not confusing to use, but there is also a cutter tool. A quick way to sum up the difference is the cutter tool is for cutting, and the cutter effect is for masking. To do a quick demo of exactly what the cutter effect can do, I want to zoom in here on our character's eyes. And we see here that one of the eyeballs is actually outside of the shape of the eye. So what I want to do is use this eye shape as a mask to cut off the other part of this eyeball so everything looks like it fits in here. So to do this, I'm going to expand my head layer. So let's go here. I first want to find the eyes layer. Now, in this document, I already have them doing a blink. So what I want to do here is clone this layer, not duplicate it, but I need to clone it so the animation as well as the drawings are shown. So I'll simply right click and I want to select Clone Selected Layers, Drawings, and Timing. Okay? And I'll turn our clone here. I'll just change the name to Eye Mask. And what I want to do next is go to our eyeballs, and I'll select the left eye, and I want to go to Adding a Layer, come down to Effects, and select Cutter. I'm going to scroll over just so you can see exactly what's happening here. And I'm going to click the plus sign that's next to the cutter, and it's going to ask for a matte. Now, the matte is basically the cloned layer that we created for the eye mask. So I'm going to scroll down so I can see this, and I'm going to select the eye mask layer and drag it right to the matte. Now, as soon as we did that, this eye disappeared. Now, the reason is, by default, the eye is actually going to be masked out. So to change this, I'm going to simply double-click on the cutter, and I want to select Invert It. And we'll close this. It looks really good. And I'll also select the right eye, and we're going to add a cutter effect here as well. And we'll scroll down, and we'll drag the eye mask here as well. And again, we'll simply double-click on the cutter and invert it. So now if we scroll forward in our animation, we can see that the cutter is working. So it's masking out where the eye is. So the eye is still here, but if we move this over, you don't see it at all. And this works also on the other side. I'm going to smooth this over. Now, because the eyes are basically one shape, it's not going to keep these isolated, but we can adjust that by hand. So with the ability to affect more than one layer, as well as invert its masking, the cutter is a pretty versatile effect. One of the most powerful features in Toon Boom Harmony Essentials is its camera. And not only is it powerful, but it's pretty simple to use, and you can create complex multiplane scenes very quickly. So first up, we'll need to space out our drawings on the z-axis. Now, when you look at the drawings we have set up here, and I have the document called Setup Backgrounds, we have multiple layers. We have the sky, sun, clouds, volcano, mountains, plains, and we have a couple of characters in the middle, second layer, as well as things that are in the very, very forefront. Now, what we're going to do is start to separate these on the z-axis. So to do this, I'm going to go to my top view. Come over here and click on top, and if you don't see this, simply go to Windows, come down and select Top. Now basically what this is, it's pretty much the equivalent of looking down on all of these layers, and this line going across the middle here, well, that is where all of these layers are by default. So what we're going to do is space these out, and by doing this, we're going to be placing these on different parts of the z-axis. This will allow us to create a multiplane. So to do this, I want to first show you a way using the Translate tool, and this is using our advanced animation tools. And if you don't see these tools, simply go to Windows, Toolbars, and select Advanced Animation. So when moving these pieces, I'm going to start with the bottom, or what should be furthest back, which would be the sky. So I'll select the sky, and I can either select it from the timeline, or I can select it from the icon here at the top view. Now I have the Translate tool selected, so if I move this back, pushing this further back in Z space, but if you notice, in our camera view, it's actually shrinking at the same time. And this is actually not what we want. So I'm going to undo that, Command Z, and instead, what I want to choose is the Maintain Size tool. So I'll click on this, and we'll select our sky, and again, I'll push this back, and this is going to go back pretty far. And in our camera view, everything looks the same because we've requested that it maintain the size. This tool in particular is one of the reasons that I can tell my illustrators to draw everything exactly the way it would be in scale. Then I can simply place all the different elements on the z-axis so they would make sense in the depth field. So now I'll select the sun, and I'm still making sure I have the Maintain Size tool, and I'll move this back. And I want to make sure not to go past the sky or it will disappear. And the clouds, I'll move back pretty close. Now the volcano is going to be up a little bit closer. And so now we'll move the mountains that are a little in front of the volcano and the plains. And we're just separating these out of it. And then the first. Last but not least, I actually have an animation of our character Koi, who's simply walking. So I want to select Koi, and I want to place him probably right behind our mammoth here. And it looks like we can push him back a little bit further. And last but not least, we'll go ahead and scale him down a little bit and place him in the scene. So we have all of that set. And one of the main things you always want to think about, especially if you're coming from working in a Flash background, is you don't want to think of this rectangle as the stage. You want to think of this as the camera. So for this reason, we have a lot of our elements that go way outside of this area, and that's going to allow us to move around a bit, especially when we start working on our camera movements. So when designing your backgrounds and art, remember to draw to scale and don't be afraid to draw outside of the box. Though we've been working in our camera view, and we've even used the top view to place our layers in Z-space, we still need to add a camera to our scene. Now to do this, it's pretty simple. We're going to come down here to our Add Layers button, and we'll select Camera. Now if we scroll down here to the bottom, we can now see our camera. Now to show you what we've done so far, I'm going to go ahead and grab our Translate tool with my camera selected, and I can kind of move this around a bit. And you can see exactly how our camera tool is going to be working. Now to show you what the finished animation would look like, I'm going to go ahead and use the camera mask. And I'll come down here at the base of my camera view and click on Camera Mask. And so now, if I'm zooming around or moving up and down, you can see exactly all the different elements moving in Z-space. So I'll go ahead and turn off my camera mask. And we'll move our camera back to its original position. Now that our layers in camera are in place, we're ready to start animating and move our camera through the scene. To animate our camera, we'll need to add it to a peg. Once this is done, we can add some pans and easing to help bring our scene to life. So now take a look at my timeline here. I'm going to scroll all the way down, and I see my camera. What I want to do now is simply go up to Add a Layer, and I'm going to come down to Select Peg. So now that we have a peg attached, I'm going to bring my playhead back to the beginning here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on my Animate button. And instead of using my Transform tool, I'm going to go up to my Advanced Animation tools. And if you don't see these, you'd simply go up to Windows, come down to Toolbars, and select Advanced Animation. So what I'm going to do is select my Translate tool. And looking at my camera view, I can move the green arrow here. And this is going to move up and down on the x-axis. I'm going to keep pulling this up right till I get to about the edge of the vines here. Like I know they're only drawn out a certain amount, so I'm going to just stop that about right at the vines. And because our Animate button is turned on, we've already gained a keyframe from doing that. And now I'm going to scrub my playhead all the way to the end, and you can see our character Koi walking through the scene. And at the end, what I want to do is I'm going to bring this all the way down to the bottom here. And I am now going to go over to the top view. And if you can't see the top view, simply go to Windows and come down and select Top. So what I want to do on the top view, I'm going to push forward into the scene. And so we have this one straight little animation here. And now I'm going to play this back. All right, now that's not too bad, but it is a little bit stiff. And so what I want to do is add in some easing. So I want my camera to first come in a little bit fast, and then I want it to slow on the end. So to do this, I'll scroll over, select the keyframe of my camera peg, and then on my timeline, I'll come over here to easing, and I'll select the fourth one down, which is going to allow it to come in pretty slow, then the camera's going to speed up. So if I play this now, there's several other options I could choose. If I wanted that to be a little less slow, I can grab the third one. Or I can even come closer to the bottom and have this go very fast at the beginning and then slow down. So I think we'll go with that one. And just to see what's actually happening, I'll come down here and I'll select this very first keyframe of our camera peg. And I want to select Show Control, and it's showing us the full path. Now the next thing I'll do is I'm going to get another view of our camera. We have the top view, but I want to add the side view. So I'll go to Windows, open Side View, and I'm going to simply scrub my playhead to about midway, and I'll come over here in the side view, and I'm going to bend the camera downward a little bit. So now if I play this back, and so I'm just kind of scrubbing back and forth and just seeing how things are. And I think I do want to bring this up a little bit so we don't cut off the top of our character's head. And to take one last look, I'll go ahead and turn on my camera mask, and I'll turn off our control, and I'll turn on the loop so we can see this playing in a loop. Remember, it's always a good practice to add easing to your camera's animation, and by doing this, you'll avoid giving the animation a very stiff feel. There are times when drawings, objects, or animations need to be parented to the camera. For example, a flashing video record sign, or maybe an animated rain cycle. For this animation, we'll parent both the sky and the sun to the camera's peg. I'm going to zoom out here just so we can see everything that's happening. And I'm going to play my animation. Okay. Now everything looks pretty decent, but to give it a little more realism and actually more depth, what we're going to do is parent not only the sky, but the sun and the clouds. We're going to be parenting those to the same peg that's controlling the camera. So I'm going to go down to my timeline. I'm going to scroll down for a moment, and I'm going to grab the sky and just simply drag this under the camera's peg. Now, once I've done that, if I click play, we already have a little more realism added. So I'm going to zoom out. And now in addition to the sky, I want to drag the sun as well as the clouds. So I'll go ahead and collapse my camera peg. And now if I play my animation, now when we look at the final result, it appears as if the sun nor the clouds are actually moving at all, and they're just tracking along with the camera. So by parenting our sun, sky, and clouds to the camera peg, we've 1, made the sky appear to be pretty large, and 2, helped to push the illusion of a multiplane scene. Just be sure to place any elements you want attached to the camera's peg further back in Z-space than the other layers. Now we've finished with our scene and we're ready to export. That being said, when it comes to exporting video from Harmony, I usually use its default, which is video using the animation codec. Now, it can be a large file, but it will give you a great quality and the ability to export your video with transparent backgrounds or alpha channels. So to export video, I'll simply go to File, come down and select Export, and go to Movie. Now, the first box is going to tell you where you can actually save out your movie. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this in my main area, and this is going to be for scene 2, so let's make this O2. And the next section allows me to select a range. For instance, if there's only a small section of my animation I needed to render out to test, then I could come here and select only a certain amount of frames. But I do want to go ahead and select all for this one. For resolution, you can go ahead and set this as same as scene resolution, or you do have options of setting it at 1/4 of the size or half or even 3/4 of the size. This comes in handy if you're trying to save out a thumbnail to send either to a client or perhaps you need a preview to place on a website. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave mine at same as scene resolution. And last but not least, here are the options, and this is where you're going to be setting the video codec. Now, the video codec or format we're going to be using is animation. So you always want to make sure this is set to best. Now, if you have a transparent background that should be showing, for instance, if we only had our character with none of the scene here, we may want a transparent background. So I'd simply go to Settings, and I would come down to the compressor. Instead of millions of colors, I would make it millions of colors plus. Now the plus basically means we would be adding an alpha channel, so you would be able to see any transparent areas in the video. But again, this is only if you don't have a background. So I'm going to set this back to millions of colors. And the important part here is quality. You should always keep this set to best. So go ahead and click on OK. And for sound, I usually use uncompressed. And the sample rate, I'm going to change this so it's at least CD quality. So I'll click on Settings. And I'll come down and set this to 44.1. And if the sound that you've brought in actually is stereo, it's best to go ahead and select stereo. But because I know the sound that I'm using is actually in mono, I'm going to leave this at mono. I'll click OK. And I want to turn off Prepare for Internet Streaming. And we'll click OK. And I'll go ahead and click OK once more. And now my video will start to render. And depending on the strength of your computer, this can be CPU intensive. So remember, even though the file might be a little bit large and it may be a little bit intensive to get it rendered out, you'll want to set your animation codec properties to best. And you should only use millions plus if you have a transparent background. Depending on your needs, there may come a time when you need to export still images or a single still image from your animation. Now, this is a pretty simple process. You just have to keep some things in mind. One of the main things you have to think about is the camera view area. That's basically what's going to export. So the rectangle here is going to export. So if I zoom out here, you won't see any of the outlying art. Think of this like the artboard in programs like Illustrator or even Photoshop. So to export this image, I'm simply going to go to File, Export, and select Images. Now I can come here and give this a name or a prefix. And this comes in handy if you're exporting the entire animation, for instance, a series of PNGs or JPEGs. Now for this example, I'm going to go ahead and export a single frame. So I'll just place this under 92. And the file types, you can do a TGA, there's even Photoshop, a PNG file, or even PDF. So I'm going to select PDF. Depending on the file type you've chosen, you can actually change what color mode you're going to be using. For instance, if I select PSD, I can do color with transparency or grayscale. So I'll select PDF again, and the color depth is set to 8. And again, this also changes if you change what format you're using. All right, so I'll go ahead and set this back to PDF. And I can also select to export all of the frames or just a selected frame. And for here, I'm just going to export from frame 92 to frame 92. And I'll just click OK. Now, there is one additional thing you might want to think about. Because we're working in vectors, you can actually scale things to a pretty decent size, and this comes in handy if you're exporting for print. Now, if you are exporting for print, remember that we're working at 72 dpi here. And generally, in print, you're going to want the size that you originally create to be 4 times the original size. So this document is set up at 1920 by 1080. So I would want that about 4 times that size in order to export it for print. So depending on your image's final destination, just make sure that all the effects and layer orders export, and avoid stretching any bitmap layers. When it comes to getting a movie from Toon Boom Harmony to YouTube, Vimeo, or even Facebook, the process I use is pretty simple, but I do use a program outside of Harmony to do this. Now typically my process is I would go to File, Export, Movie, and then I would simply export the movie from Toon Boom Harmony in the default standard, which is setting it at an animation codec. Now, if you need more information on that, please check out the video at the beginning of this chapter on how to export a video. Now, once I've exported the video, I use another program, and it's called MPEG Stream Clip. Now, you can get this online, and to get it, you can go to squared5.com. This program is available for both Mac and PC, and is absolutely free. So once you've downloaded the program and you open it up, this is basically what the interface looks like. So all you would have to do is simply drag your video straight to this little window. So I have my video here. I'm going to just simply click and drag this over. And I can even click to play the video. And if needed, I can even set in and out points if I didn't want the entire video. So I can scrub exactly where I want it to be. And for my endpoint, I'll simply press the letter I and scroll a little bit further. And where I want my video to stop, I'll simply press the letter O. Now, once you're ready, you'll simply go to File, and the option I choose is Export to MPEG-4. Now, the reason I use MPEG-4 is it uses a compression referred to as H.264. Now, if this sounds very complicated, basically almost any video you see online is probably using this compression, and it's also the compression that's used for Blu-ray DVDs. Now for quality, I want to move this up to 100%, and for limiting the data rate, depending on the type of movie you have, if you don't have a lot of movement, you can probably start at around 2,000 kilobytes per second. But what I'm going to do for this particular movie is I'm going to up this to about 8,000 kilobytes per second. Now, if this sounds a little complicated, basically, the more information you're giving per second, it's going to give a cleaner image. So for sound, I'll have MPEG-4 AAC, and the frame size, I want to keep this at the original movie size of 1920 by 1080. And I'll now go ahead and make the MP4. We'll save this in the same folder, and you'll see a preview that'll pop up. So now if we take a look, Our original movie is 184 megs, and our finished movie is only 4.9 megs. So if we look at the original, simply double click. I'm going to zoom in here. So there's our original. And if we open up the MP4, there we have it. So at a fraction of the size, we were able to export a movie that is ready for using on YouTube, Vimeo, or even Facebook. So try out these settings to start and raise the kilobytes per second if the quality seems poor. But all in all, you should get a pretty decent video at a fraction of the size of the original. To export from Harmony to Flash, the simplest way is just to use an SWF. That being said, it may take some trial and error to see what effects carry over, and remember, not all versions of Flash still can import an SWF. So to do this, I'll simply go to File, come down to Export, and select SWF. Now I can select where my file is going to be exported, so I already have my folder set up, and I can choose whether to export the entire movie or just a frame range. And I'm going to keep all of my options the same. Now, the JPEG quality is basically if I have any bitmaps in my movie. Now, I can choose to protect this from import, and this comes in handy if you're just going to be using the SWF to be shown on a website. But because we're actually wanting this to go to Flash, we want to make sure this box is not checked. I'm also not going to compress the movie. And converting the pencil lines to brushstrokes, that's more a personal choice. 9 times out of 10, when I'm working, I've already converted all of my pencil lines, so I usually don't worry about this box. Now, the last part here, it's going to take a little bit of trial and error to see what things you've created in your animation. You want to see if they can convert over to an SWF and then be brought into Flash with no problem. So once this is done, I'll simply click OK. And so it is exported, and we see the file here. And I'm just going to open this up in a web browser. And there's my SWF. So I'll go ahead and close this. Just remember, exporting your animation to Flash is pretty simple, but trying to actually edit your Harmony animation in Flash will be problematic at best.